Rockingham 505. 505 enter vandalism case for Athens, complainant, soon to be ex, slashed her tires and has made threatening comments to her. She's concerned he might return.
That's forgive that's a 32.
10-4. 532, you're assigned to a vandalism case in Athens. Did you copy the 505?
Yeah, 4. Look at that. No, 3 in Depot Street. Truck boy entry 5.
That was 435.
10.
10-4.
You go 43 again.
143.
You go with that 43 you had. I didn't hear any, but I had jumped the flag me down.
10-4, I just wanted to know if you should be put back 76 to Cabana Circle or to the subject's address.
Yeah, I'll be 23 back on that town property case, and I'll be 76 to the Williams Road address to see if I can find the owner.
10-4. 449, 1120.
449, 1121, thank you.
10-4.
Code 4. 4.
Rockingham 535.
That's Green College.
535.
Should be. Got no for a woman who fucked into a house. I'll flight up that way.
Caller is now been able to close the front door. He's now pounding on the door, trying to get in still. No flight floor on her here. Got tie-dye shirt on. And number 21 is on.
We have separation. Inboard now. She's ready.
Hey guys, good to see you. Good to be here. A lot of work to do tonight. We have an exciting show. I have the great John Depetro on at 6:30. Then I have a new guest on, a psychotherapist who's going to talk about cults and social media and that kind of stuff. She's really smart and has an interest in this area. She's not a big follower of the free Karen Reed case. So this will be just kind of, we'll be discussing the social media phenomenon. And then we'll go back to discussing the Reed case with the great defense attorney, Kevin J Mahoney. So this show is actually geared directly to the jurors. Let me just adjust my microphone up. Court TV has me turn it down sometimes. So You guys can give me some feedback if the mic, I'm looking over at the monitor, if the mic sounds too low or too high or something like that, let me know. And for everybody, I see all the regulars here. I'm glad to see you. I love it. I can't always say hi in chat, but I do see you here. Thank you, guys. And make sure you behave for Tom Fleming in chat there. He is building up the greatest, most productive and interesting chat community on the internet. Thank you, Thomas. So this show is geared directly to the jurors, who I hope are obeying their oath and not watching. Writers like me love that kind of irony. But I know there's an almost irresistible urge with the jurors at this late stage to check out social media. And I just want to make sure if that happens, you get a balanced view. I want to make sure you have a fuller understanding of all the consequences to what you're weighing here. You know all the evidence now, but you may not be aware of the wider phenomenon underway. We'll go into that, a dangerous phenomenon. And your courage is needed here. Most of you are on the jury. So most of you that are on the jury are using the vital tools of logic and common sense as you weigh evidence. You might be up against a holdout who does not favor such tools. I don't know. I want to fortify you, using only evidence you learned in trial and applying it logically. Certainly not because I'm better able to do that than you, but because I have been examining this for over a year, and there was an enormous amount of information for you to absorb in a short time, even though I'm sure it didn't feel short to you. So first, a little about myself. I am not connected to the prosecution or the police. I started following this case as a YouTuber because it seemed interesting. In fact, it seemed like there might be one of the more incredible conspiracies in true crime history. So I started over a year ago on this. But I'm not on any side. I never was. I'm a lifelong Massachusetts resident from north of Boston who has no connection to the Canton area. When this case was first roused up by a dishonest blogger named Turtle Boy, I recognized that he and the defense team were exploiting each other by trying to turn up a mob. Still, I was completely ignorant of things like extractions of phone data, for example. So when I saw that one of the witnesses had made the strange search for how long to die in the cold, I figured there had to be a cover-up. Who would make such a search randomly? But then I saw that the state had truly elite experts that refuted this. So I dug harder and harder into the evidence. We knew a certain amount from the court documents and the hearings, and now we know the rest from the trial. And I'm certain that the evidence points directly at Karen having struck John with her vehicle, and that there was no opportunity to plant evidence or orchestrate an elaborate cover-up. Are there some odd and unexplained things in the case? A few. Most have been explained now, but there are loose ends in every case, literally every single one. And these cases, these odd things don't add up to reasonable doubt if the rest of the evidence is beyond a reasonable doubt. So, in other words, odd things can be meaningful, or they can be just odd things. And what it depends on is whether the rest of the foundational evidence adds up. If it doesn't add up very well, then those odd things can become meaningful. They can be a sign of what really happened, right? But because there are odd things in every case, and many cases are certainly the evidence, the foundational evidence is very, very strong and compelling and well beyond reasonable doubt. When you have a case like that, those odd things are still going to be there, but they just become odd things. So I'm going to go over the unshakable evidence with a focus on hard data and physical evidence. Then I'm going to show you how the timelines render a cover-up here to be mathematically close to impossible. Let's go. Now, I'm not going to tease you and then solve the riddle at the end. No. Let's give you the bulletproof evidence right out of the gate. Or more accurately, let's tie together what was given to you by Trooper Paul and Trooper Garino. Unfortunately, the way the prosecution chose to present that to you, you have to connect it on your own a little. But don't punish the many victims here, most importantly, the O'Keefe family, but also the many people that have been falsely smeared by the defendant and her team over the last year. Don't punish them because the state didn't deliver the bulletproof evidence as clearly as they should have. The state was forced to spend weeks defending against one of the more insane theories ever posted by a defense team. That's no excuse, but you're there to decide truth based on the evidence provided. And that evidence is not really in doubt. The important thing is to link the vehicle data presented by Trooper Paul with the data from John's phone presented by Trooper Garino. So again, that's the vehicle data and the data that was found on John's phone. These link together in a way that's truly bulletproof. So John opened Waze on the way to the after hours and typed in 34 Fairview. They were a little over a mile away. The time was 12:20. At 12:23 and about 30 seconds, they missed the turn onto Fairview. So Karen had to do a 3-point turn to come back to the intersection. That 3-point turn was recorded in the vehicle data, which was later tabulated by Lexus Toyota, not by the state police. 8 minutes after that 3-point turn, the vehicle data records Karen putting it in drive, going forward a few seconds, then suddenly slamming it into reverse and punching the accelerator. She went 62 feet in reverse and reached almost 25 miles per hour. Within that data is the classic signature of a pedestrian strike. The speed dropped suddenly about 3/4 of a mile an hour, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's what it registers when a large object, so a 2-ton vehicle, strikes a 200-pound man. It's not going to slow the vehicle much, but it is something that registers on the vehicle data. And also registered at that exact moment was a slight steering wheel jolt. It went from turning left to slightly to turning right. So please note that none of us has looked at vehicle data, right? We're not experts in vehicle data. All right, so we can say, well, what does that mean? But note, the defense did not challenge any of that. Instead, they tried to distract you by saying Proctor's name 200 times and talking about butt dials. Don't worry, we'll come back to the butt dials, don't worry. But please remember, the defense did not challenge this hard data compiled by Lexus Toyota. They didn't challenge Trooper Paul's conclusion about that, about the signature that they found in the data that's typical of a pedestrian strike. Now, it's the job of a defense team, kind of, right, to bring in experts that are going to fudge things in a way that might even be dishonest. And they did this. They brought in pretty much all the experts they brought in turned out to be pretty unreliable. I think you sense that while you're sitting there. But they brought in no expert on the vehicle data. Why? Because they couldn't. They didn't even try to suggest that Karen had backed into a curb. So 8 minutes after Karen performed her 3-point turn, she floored it in reverse and struck something around the size of a pedestrian. But another source of data picked all this up, John's phone. Seconds after this strike, his phone moved for the very last time until it was picked up in the morning. This is according to the health app data revealed by Trooper Garino. John's phone last moved a little after 12:32. Now, there's a lot more. I'm going to get into it, but really, how much more do I need? Doesn't that kind of do it right there? Karen struck a pedestrian 8 minutes after her 3-point turn on Cedar Crest. John was found in that exact location. John's GPS shows he never moved from that location. John's Waze data and the GPS on his phone show the 3-point turn just before 12:24. It shows John's phone stopping in the location that Karen eventually stopped at the edge of the property around 12:25. Again, isn't that really enough? Did Karen's team even try to suggest the GPS was not accurate? No. They instead tried to distract you by talking about other data. But you were paying attention, and you know they did not challenge the GPS because GPS data is as rock solid as it gets. Okay, GPS data is established in your devices as a special chip that is designed only for one purpose, and that is to detect a satellite signal from a GPS satellite. Those satellites exist just for that purpose. They're originally designed by the military. Most of them that are up there are still with military in purpose, but they're designed so that the U.S. military can send a missile through an Ayatollah's window 1,000 miles away. They're very, very accurate. The signal is measured in half seconds. Now, it's normally accurate to within 15 feet. But if the signal grows weak for a moment, that's all part of the data. That's measured. So there's no mystery. Now, here, there was only a 4-second period, during which the signal became weak enough that the margin of error expanded from that 15 feet to actually include the house. But at no point was there any indication of him moving towards the house or towards the driveway. So John didn't go near the house. That's fact. Unless you want to posit that he dropped his phone and then went in without it. But that seems very unlikely, especially when you combine with the other data that shows Karen struck a pedestrian right at that time at that location where John's phone ended up. So meanwhile, a mountain of physical evidence connects Karen's SUV to the crime. The debris was found in a spray pattern indicating a strike in the vicinity of where John was found. John's sneaker was found in the gutter, and pedestrian collisions usually involve throwing the victim from at least one of his shoes. John's DNA was found on the taillight housing. When reassembled, the taillight matches exactly the piece missing on Karen's SUV. The remnants of the drinking glass in John's hand was found beside him. Snow had not accumulated around John, indicating he'd been out there all night. Now, a good defense will try to take our eye off the ball with what I call the theory of odd things. As I mentioned, there are odd things in every case. If you look close enough, O.J. Simpson, the Moscow, Idaho murders, Lizzie Borden. Like I said, odd things can be meaningful if the overall case is weak. But if the case is beyond a reasonable doubt, those odd things become just odd things, things that happen in everyday life that we just never really learn the explanation for. I've already shown you that the case here is way beyond reasonable doubt. So that means the odd things are just odd things, things that happen in every case. It's not, when I say odd things, I don't mean like they're supernatural Bermuda Triangle type stuff. It's just things that we never do learn the explanation. That's all it means. Now, before we get to some of those odd things, most of which now have common sense explanations, let's discuss timelines, because the timelines are also bulletproof here. Look, I don't have any cops in my family. I understand full well that there are cases where cops fudged or even planted evidence. So no one gets the benefit of the doubt from me. I start believing just about everything is possible, and then I start trying to eliminate the impossible based on the actual evidence. I don't tell you Trooper Proctor would not plant evidence. I don't know him. I tell you there was no opportunity for him to tamper with the SUV and plant the evidence within the timeline. It's bulletproof. It took me months to figure out that timeline from the documents and the hearings, but by last September, I had. And with the more detailed information from the trial, we really know now that there was just no opportunity to tamper with and plant evidence. The defense wants to make you think Proctor did it in the Sally Port, but apparently, he did it. They want to say that that it's suspicious that he's behind the SUV. Well, naturally, he's behind the SUV looking at the damage. That's where he would be, right? There's no evidence in that video of him touching it. The vehicle was brought to the Sally Port because the Sally Port was heated. And so think about this. Now, none of us are criminologists, right? So we have to think about it in many ways for the first time. But this is how they thought about it back then. They know the chem team has to come in to go over every inch of that vehicle to look for evidence, because everything's compartmentalized and specialized in the state police. Nobody's running, no one person. This is not like something you see on TV where, like an old CSI episode or something where a couple of police are running the investigation or, trying to figure things out like Sherlock Holmes. It's not like that. It's very bureaucratic, and each person team is kind of just doing their trained part of the job. And there's a whole bunch of people and several teams involved. So in that Sally Port, they brought it there because it had, you didn't want to touch the vehicle until that ice and snow was melted off it. So that most of the garages are not heated. The Sally Port was heated. So that's why he brought it there. Did we see 5 people were in the garage? We don't know all the people that were there, but of those 5 people that were in the garage, so if Proctor's going to tamper with that taillight, everybody has to see it. I mean, it's a loud thing to smash a taillight and start pulling pieces off. And they're all paying attention to the damage in the same location too. So let's look at the timeline to see if it was even possible, though. Let's say these guys all are in it for some reason to frame Karen to protect I don't even know who. So Karen's car left her parents' house in Dighton on the tow truck at 4:18. It arrived outside the Sally Port at 5:31. It was driven into the Sally Port by the tow truck driver at 5:36. The Sally Port door closes with Proctor inside at 5:38. Proctor is seen behind the SUV, still behind the SUV at around 5:40. Now it's a 5-minute drive to the crime scene. So what's going on at the crime scene? Well, at that time, so the 7-man CERT team begins shoveling almost shoulder to shoulder at 5:41. The area they shovel out is about the size of two parking spaces. So it's very small. It's 7 guys shoveling out a very small area. You can see, I should have pulled up the video for it. If I will, I'll pull it up after. But so there was also a news crew there from WBZ. So they get there at least an hour ahead of time. They film this going on, and they film the aftermath, which is that's where you can see that space is about the size of 2 parking spaces. And they finish the whole job and leave at 6:22. So it's a very small area that they're sifting through the snow. Now they find the main piece at 5:45. Again, Proctor is seen in the garage at 5:40. The 7-man team is overseen by Lieutenant Tully. So you got at least 8 troopers there. Proctor is outranked by Sergeant Buchanan, who testified he's with Proctor all day. Now, Lieutenant O'Malley testified very credibly. You saw him. So he is the head of the CERT team. He arrived before 5 p.m. Others started filtering in, and the last one got there at 5:41. While Proctor had to either still be in the garage or was seconds away from it, right? So all of them were there. Someone had begun shoveling earlier, but they all started shoveling in earnest once the entire team was there at 7:41. So there was absolutely no way for Proctor to somehow get to that scene and bury the pieces 3 feet down, because that's how they were found. So not unless there were 11, or not unless all 11 or 12 of these troopers were in on it. And that's really hard to believe, isn't it? Like, people have asked the question, why didn't the Canton police, and the defense has asked the question, why didn't the Canton police find those red pieces of taillight in the morning when the Canton police searched? Well, the Canton police knew the state police would be eventually taking over the crime scene. They knew a specialized team, the CERT team, would be coming in. They knew homicide investigators would be coming in. Canton police does not have homicide investigators. It's a small town. Okay, they don't have that training. They don't have that equipment. As we saw, they didn't even have evidence bags. So they did the best they could under the circumstances of a blizzard. And they searched the area around where John's body was found. He was found 6 feet onto the lawn. So they gathered a little bit of blood drops just in case it might match to somebody else. They gathered the remnants of the cocktail glass that was found near John's body. But one thing they didn't do and never would have done was start shoveling that scene. They saved that for the state police and for more trained professionals to do that. Now, those taillight pieces were found eventually within the plow bank near the curbstone. Within the plow bank. So they were never going to find them. That's where John's shoe was found. They were never going to find that. Never. It was buried. Now, we know that Lucky plowed it at 5:30. He testified that, and it's also visible in the dash cam video from Officer Sharaf, the first cop to arrive at the scene. You can see the small video. You can see the small snowbank that's there. So let's say there's about 2 or 3 inches of snow when Lucky plows at 3:30. That's going to be enough to create exactly that small snowbank that we see in the dash cam video. Now, also remember, the feds got Proctor's phone data. They'd know if he went there. They didn't say that. Meanwhile, the taillight itself is shown in pieces at 5:07. If I have time, I'll bring you up the zoom on it. I can do that for you guys. Let me just quickly bring up, and John's on standby. We're going to have him in about 5-10 minutes. And let me just pull up this video file for you, though, because this really shows. Okay. There we go. So this was made with the help of Hillbilly Nitro. We just zoomed in on the taillight. The defense doesn't show you this angle. They show you it from behind. But this is the key angle from the side. And it only catches like this for a second or two. But you can see clearly it's very close to exactly what you see above. Now, maybe another little piece, that corner, fell off, and what wasn't introduced in trial, so maybe I shouldn't talk about, but you know what, I'm not going to talk, but there was evidence in discovery that we'll find out afterwards that probably explains why this little piece was missing. But more or less, you can see exactly the same pattern that you see later on in the Sally port. It's missing huge chunks here in more or less the same way. So we also, it's missing pieces that's at 507 in the driveway. At 5:30, Kerry Roberts describes it as being in pieces, just it was later seen in the Sally port. They showed her a picture. She said that's it. And the defense did not challenge Kerry Roberts. So that taillight is in pieces at 5:30. At 8:22, it's shown in the dash cam video at John's house to be in the same way, in those pieces. It's shown that way on the tow truck before leaving Dighton. So that's it. This taillight was in pieces long before it got to the Sally port. All right. They can try to distract you with all kinds of weird arguments. It was in pieces. All right. Remember, OJ, if the glove doesn't quit, you must, if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. Well, if the taillight was missing pieces, you must find Karen Reed guilty. Now, that doesn't rhyme, but the logic is unsinkable. Now, what about the odd things? Most of these are defense tricks. There was no 227 search. Remember, Karen asked the paramedic the same question on the ambulance. She asked basically, how long does it take to die in the cold without a coat? Two of the top experts in the world have explained that this is a data glitch, including a designer from the company whose software, Celebrite, was the one that found that data glitch. So 227 just didn't happen, and it didn't make sense anyways. It doesn't make sense that Jen and Matt go home to their parents. I'm sorry, to their children, to their 4 little girls, knowing that the conspiracy plan is to leave her friend, John O'Keefe, outside on the lawn. It doesn't make sense. What about the stair climbing? Again, this is stuff that was found by the defense, Rich Green. It is in the data, but it's only in the health app data. And the alleged period of stair climbing takes place when much better data, the GPS, shows that John was first a mile away and then half mile away. So all of that takes place, all of that alleged stair climbing takes place while Karen and John are actually shown to be driving there. The dog bites, I mean, you're always going to get competing experts in these things, but you can use your own common sense. The criminologists did swabs on John's right arm and that clothing, and no canine DNA was detected. It would be. But again, common sense. If you picture how a dog's mouth is, it's much longer than my hand, and it goes onto your arm. The bottom part of the jaw is going to make wounds on the underside of the arm. There was not a single wound on the inside part of John's arm. So unless John was attacked by a one-jawed dog, there's no way that these were dog bites. And it's really hard to get around that. What about the medical examiner? Well, the medical examiner didn't seem like a great asset to the prosecution here, but she was also, it's only because she's being factual. She can't say for sure. So say she ruled that John's injury was likely from a fall, but in reality, there's no way of knowing it's a head wound, right? What about the ARCA guys? Well, the ARCA guys you didn't learn much about this in the trial, but I'll say this here. They were hired by the feds. The feds, for some reason, interfered in this case for Karen's team. And that goes back to August of 2022. But you can see hints of it in their testimony, that they were biased, that they were not seeking the data, all of the data they needed. The same as Rich Green. If they wanted all the data, they would have got the vehicle data. The vehicle data, if nothing else, they're running experiments, right? They're making little guns to shoot glasses in the lab. But they would want at least for instance, accurate information about from the vehicle data that shows what speed Karen's SUV was traveling. They didn't want that. They had no interest in it. So they weren't after the truth. They were trying to come up, for whatever reason, with something that would help the person who hired them, which is the feds. And for some reason, the feds aligned themselves with Karen's team very early on. So did Karen know? Is she guilty of second-degree murder? Well, maybe there's some doubt on that, but there's a lot of information to suggest it, okay? Karen after the accident, called John numerous times on the way home. She gets home and leaves a bunch of angry messages. In those messages, she says she accuses him of cheating on her. The last message is at 1:18. So she probably had some idea that she had hit something, but maybe she thought John was all right. At sometime after 4:30, so at 4:38, she calls John, no answer. At 4:40, she calls her parents. At 4:42, she calls her parents and talks to them. We don't know what the conversation was, but right after that, she wakes the niece by screaming in the hallway, screaming. She's frantic. She's panicking. She's screaming. She's having a breakdown. She's screaming that something has happened to John. Now, why would she think that? Why would she? At 1:18, she thinks John's just cheating on her, and then suddenly she believes that something's happened to John. She calls Jen and says her taillight's cracked. She calls Kerry Roberts and says John's dead, that maybe he was hit by a plow. Again, the defense did not challenge Kerry Roberts. One thing that she didn't do was call 911. And John was still alive when he was picked up a little after 6. So if she had called 911, that means he would have got to a hospital over an hour earlier. That's second degree. What about Lucky Laughlin, the plow driver? Well, Lucky Laughlin did plow the street at sometime around 2:30 and didn't see John. But something that came out in the trial but wasn't fully developed. But Lucky testified that he last plowed the street at 5:30. And notice he didn't see a body then either. Certainly John was there. Even with the conspiracy theory suggested by the defense, had John been put out sometime earlier, at that point he'd be visible, right? Well, Lucky didn't see him. So Lucky Laughlin is just another one of those unreliable witnesses that emerge in these cases. What about the defendant trying to blame innocent people, friends of John, people that offered friendship to her? What about the hysteria of this case? Now, this is something you may not be aware of now, but how will this look a year from now? I don't know. I mean, I think the evidence is very clear. And I think in the middle of this hysteria, it's not clear. This defense team has managed to whip this up. But what you do on the jury now will be remembered later by how you weighed evidence, not whether or not you appease the mob. No one wants to see anyone go to prison. No one wants to see another family suffer. But the implications have now grown much bigger in this case. Now, a juror was recently dismissed who, in fact, betrayed each of you because she lied under oath to get on that jury. She came into it with her mind made up. She never intended to weigh evidence like you are. She never intended for there to be justice, because justice is decided by a jury that is sworn to weigh evidence impartially. She didn't do that. You spent 2 months together forming a unique bond that only jurors who have been on something like this can understand. Each of you must remember, you must not forget the sacrifices that you all made together and not betray the others on the jury by sticking to a conclusion you may have brought into the trial beforehand. So be true to those you've built this unshakable bond with. We need you to do that, and that's all we need you to do. So let me bring in one of my favorite people, John Depetro. Hey, John.
Kevin, it is such a pleasure to be with you. See you, and the show is just fantastic. So, Kevin, great. Love your open tonight. 100% on the money.
So I want to talk about a lot of things with you today. And first of all, I mean, because you've been covering this case since early on, both in and outside of court, and you've had a tremendous experience there outside of court and inside of court this week. But before we do that, I know it's probably not appropriate for us to address the jury, right? We don't want them watching us, but if they're going to be watching other social media, we at least want some balance. So what would you try to tell these guys?
You know, I would try to tell them, Kevin, that they have to think of their world has been so isolated, which is, it's almost like a movie set, right? They're bussed in, they see all these people out at the buffer zone in the pink shirts. This has been a very intense trial. They saw all the family members come in that seemed like good guys, but then they were peppered and pounded by the defense attorney. I think what the jury needs to do is, granted, Kevin, this trial, I think it has taken too long. And early on, you think of some of the days off. I think the judge, if she could do it over again, probably shouldn't have had so many days off. Shouldn't have let Adam Lally, who again I support. I think he did a good job, but so much about the high tops and the band and it was snowing. And then I also think the judge let Alan Jackson specifically, Kevin, who is, see, to me, this is a different trial that you don't have Alan Jackson, but
Right.
almost let him go on too long. I understand why, because he can be intimidating and he's
Right.
Mr. LA and you don't want to be overturned, but you can't underestimate. They let him go on. I mean, Jen McCabe, 3 days on the stand. It was overkill. A normal trial, not televised. Come on, forget it. Maybe one day, maybe a day and a half, but I think she let him go on too long with many of the witnesses. And so the jury is the biggest thing they've ever been involved in, Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
Friends know where they work, family, they all know they're part of this. We know it's hard. And we know that this is probably more than what they signed up for. This is probably, they thought, yeah, I'll do this case. But I compare it to, this is like a roller coaster. And I get the sense the jury is waving like, okay, can we stop this? Because I want to get off. Like this,
Right.
It has been interesting. This is way more than I thought it was going to be. And what you've hit on, you cannot ignore. See, to me, Thursday, when Karen Reed directed her supporters to go harass the O'Keeffes at the VFW Hall, that was actually, she was showing the jurors, sending a message. If we'll do this to the O'Keeffes, then you're not safe, and we're going to do this to you. I also want people to realize, this is not a great analogy, Kevin, but during January 6th, how many times would people say, President Trump had a chance to tell the rioters to stop and get out of there, and he wouldn't, and then he waited, blah, blah, blah. I don't hear one Boston media outlet say, how come Karen Reed doesn't speak out and say, no, listen, pink people, I appreciate the support, blah, 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 but the family is off limits. And nothing, zero out of her, other than the giggling and the weird behavior and the meltdowns. So my message to the jury, and I know it's been odd for them, and they feel like, they're in the zoo and everyone watching them. And they've also seen, Kevin, I've seen the result. When people get excluded and knocked off, it's a little bit of, it reminds me of Survivor. If you remember like Survivor, when someone's voted off the island, or The Bachelor, right? Where, I'm sorry, you're off. Or you go back to Trump with The Apprentice. Granted, that person's out, but what just happened is not lost on everybody else. And they know they started with 17. They know they're down to 14. It's not easy. And it's a small courtroom. And no question about it, Alan Jackson is a very intimidating character. And there's a lot there. But my message is, if they would just go with the basics and really use common sense, as we have talked about, Kevin, and you have said it perfectly, outside of this person says dog bites, this person says no dog bites, this person says that, if you go back to the niece, Kerry Roberts, Jen McCabe, this was a drunken hit and run, death resulting. She had a chance to call 911. She didn't call 911. They failed. David Yannetti stood up in front of that jury and said it was framed. Karen Reed was framed, cover up. They never even close to approach that. So my message to the jury, we know you're tired. No one said it's easy. And even the judge said, it's not easy. But you know the right thing to do here. And more importantly, this is probably to the jurors, you didn't ask for this in some way, but this is probably the most important thing and decision that you're ever going to make. And it's an unusual decision, Kevin, because they never thought they'd be in a situation to have to judge another person in such a high-profile way. And it's not easy. I can tell you with personal experience, it's not easy to swim against the tide. It's not easy to stand up in front of the mob and say, you got to do what's right. But it tells me what's really going on is the bulk of the jury know the right thing to do, and some of the others are just a little frightened at the prospect. They would like to just drop me off and the case is over and I never had to weigh in, but that's not what they signed up for. They brought it this far. The people will be behind you. And as long as you do the right thing, and it's very clear of what happened here. If you just follow that, then you'll never have any second thoughts. I want to reassure the jury, a guilty conviction, it's not an option. It's the only thing that makes sense. Don't let, as your friend coming up, who's such an unbelievably talented guest, Kevin Mahoney wrote, when you really step back and like break down the case, Karen Reed, Kevin, in a twisted manner, actually seemed to enjoy watching Alan Jackson torture Jen McCabe when Karen Reed sat there and knew that the 227 never happened. Like, that is another level of hiring assassins to go and attack the people. She'll be discussed in another manner, but it's really simple. The jurors, you know the right thing. I know this is way more than they thought they were signing up for, but the people are with you. The foundation is with you. And, we're hearing all this talk about 2024 democracies at stake. In many ways, our justice system is at stake. If these people are successful, go ahead,
John, I would argue, and this is something I think you've talked about on your show too. I would argue reality is at stake.
Yes.
Our conception of seem to have nowadays a trouble processing evidence and facts in a way that leads to reality. But I'm sorry, continue.
I was going to, this is, it's more than what they thought. It's more than what everybody thought. But this really becomes the good guys and the bad guys, and good versus evil. People, there's a great contradiction, Kevin, that's going on out in front of the courthouse, which is, if the Massachusetts police and the police are so bad and Karen Reed can't stand them, why does she take the police escort to go in and out of court every day? She doesn't seem to have a problem with that. The regular people in the street that are dealing with the Dedham police and the Massachusetts State Police, what are they finding? They're finding, these people, they're so patient, the officers, and they're terrific, and they're there to do a job, and they don't want to have to deal with this. It's such a contradiction to what they heard in the courtroom. As much as Proctor, no one's apologizing for him. And I like the fact your guest, Tuesday Gazette, said, in a way, Lally almost overcompensated for him because I don't know, there was a way to do that. And I think if there was a retrial, you don't really have to beat him to death. But Proctor, if you really step back, he summed it up. She hit him and she left him. And then even when she came back later, she didn't call 911. I just think of everything we've heard. That's really what happened here. It's, as we've talked about, he, and the jurors know this, for all their talk, they never put him in the house. The defense, Kevin, they could never get him inside. Much like, you watch the Patriots, why did they lose 10-3? Because they never put the ball in the end zone. Yannetti Jackson, they never got him in the house. And Kevin, something else that I don't know if the jurors could appreciate, but you that follow it, your work has really been award-winning, and the people that follow it, for anyone that really pays attention, it's every week, almost, consecutively with witnesses, all of the lies were melting away, much like the snow on the SUV in the Sallyport that day. What kind of investigation where they couldn't even find his belt? There was his belt, right? What kind of investigation? They never found his sneaker. One sneaker was knocked off. They did find the sneaker. I've had people, they found John O'Keefe's blood on the doorknob in the basement. As you know, total lie. The 3 flights of stairs, it happened on the Apple Watch as they were riding over to the house. Another lie. It's for those that want the truth. It's right there. It's not as though you're in the middle of a storm. There was a famous well, if you may remember, I mean, one of the worst hurricanes was they called it the Wake of 38, the hurricane of 1938. Now,
Yeah.
granted, like you, I was not alive, but that was before, people didn't that storm changed forecasting.
Yeah.
People at that time, it seemed like a beautiful day. They didn't pay attention to weather forecast the way they used to, much like the blizzard of 78, like so much. But the people that are going along with this in the pink and others, now the grifters are different, but the regular adult out there, to me, it's as if someone is in a hurricane and they're not even looking to find a forecast. They're not actually looking to find accurate information. The truth is there. The lies have melted away as we've known. I thought it was so telling when Colin Albert, who you and I know, right? I mean, the guy, totally innocent kid. They ruined his life, had to leave college. The people that still go after him, it's so unseemly. But you didn't even hear Jackson mention him as he was then sitting there right in the courtroom in closing. Colin Albert, the Boston Herald, that had his knuckles on the front page, who was identified initially as threw the first punch to knock John down the basement stairs because he was going to rat him out for drug dealing. I mean, it's so crazy. Colin Albert, they never cross paths.
Yeah.
Never cross paths.
Yeah.
And then I also just want to mention, I mean, I was kind of chuckling during closing when Alan Jackson, after all this time, Kevin, named the murderer finally. It wasn't, the butler in the study with the envelope opener. It gave a clue. It was Brian Higgins who decided once and for all that John couldn't have. I mean,
so the moral of the story is, if you're going to plan a murder, hire a butler so you can pin it on him.
I mean, after all of this time, Brian Higgins, ATF agent, the guy started crying on the stand when he would mention his deceased sister, who couldn't believe that Karen Reed was sending him text messages. That's still the favorite, was he had to read. No, I think you're hot. Even he didn't believe it. What a manipulator. How many drinks did she have, by the way? No, that was all just to try to make John O'Keefe jealous. But Kevin, I come back to that it wasn't covered. And as a famous attorney told me one time, don't just listen to the questions they ask, listen to the questions they don't ask. You notice the pink crowd, the Free Karen Reed crowd, they never talk about the niece. They never talk about the nephew. I think what we saw on Thursday was just, I don't know, I think it was like a turning point. It was that they're still now so vicious, their comments, going after Peg O'Keefe, going after, obviously, Paul, the whole family. I think we all, go ahead.
No, I just because you bring such a wealth of experience from the other cases that you've covered, and I'd like to just draw on that a little bit if we're addressing a potential juror that's watching this, because as we've talked about, it can be difficult dealing with the mob, right? But I want to fortify them to understand that it's not that big a deal. It passes. I've been dealing with them for a year, and you've been dealing with them for many cases and many other times. And that's,
oh my God.
So the passion of the mob is always ephemeral. It's going to be brief. So whatever that passion but how you conduct yourself in the heat of that moment, with you forever. And your friends and neighbors will remember you and how you conducted yourself forever. So maybe you could talk about some of your experience with other mobs and maybe fortify the jurors a little bit with that.
You haven't had outbursts in the courtroom like I've seen sometimes, family members. This they give it's all an illusion. But people that are watching, and especially the jury, need to know, it's all a con, right? It's all a con. From the beginning, it was a con. When Karen Reed said on the body cam to the troopers about, we all know, we're all under the joke here, right? That was Brian Albert and Colin Albert. Like, from day one, it was all a lie. And then the Boston Magazine article with Gretchen Voss, where they swore up and down that they were not in communication with someone, and then it was all a lie. It was all a con.
Yeah.
It's like none of it's real. But what they need to realize is, by and large, none of the threats are real either. You know, granted,
Right.
listen, no one wants the online stuff. And it can be intimidating when you see that amount of people. I give a lot of credit to the counter protesters that went on Friday. They had every right to be there. For anyone that tries to describe them as hostile, I think you have to kind of look at the numbers. You've worked in bars. This was 350 or 400 people against 5 or
Yeah.
4 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
It's not even close.
There'll
It
be more
wasn't a matter.
Monday.
It was, and now they get criticized. Where have you been the whole time? I think more people need to speak out. It is kind of like the bully, like you stand
Yeah.
up to the bully. When I go in there, I try to walk a delicate balance because I'm not trying to instigate, but I do have the right to be there. And there are people
Right.
that want to talk to you. What I find with whatever we want to call them, the free Karen Read people, the people in pink, Kevin, it also, talk about a colossal waste. Like, think of the things they could be accomplishing or doing if it was a productive group or a church group, or like the amount of hours they spend down there. And the jurors can't be intimidated by it. And it can be. When you see that sea of people and people are contacting you, and again, this is something that I'm sure they didn't expect, but they need to know by it.
John, I just tried to interrupt you. I want, before you move on, to, because I want to hear more about that. So, like, when you interact with these people and you talk to them, are you sensing any common threads about what motivates them? Why this case seems so important to them? Why there's almost like a need that is so compelling and so internal and so emotional that it causes them to kind of dismiss evidence? What are you seeing here? What are you hearing? Any common threads from talking to them?
You've hit on something. It's really important, and I have been talking about it and discussing it. A problem I have, because they have sought me out, and it's usually when I go away from the group. So now you're down getting something to eat, something to drink, and there maybe just a couple of them, they're away from the buffer zone. Some of them are curious. Some that have tagged along are a little curious. Now, the hardcore, what I don't understand is they go back to certain YouTube channels to stay in the echo chamber. For people that are watching, an example I give is, you saw it in November 2020 with Newsmax, right? Newsmax, Fox called Arizona for President Biden. Newsmax went full deep into this, Smartmatic, and the election was stolen, and blah, 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 and Rudy Giuliani, and these voting machines from Venezuela. And Newsmax, for a short period of time, shot through the roof. And because people that were vested in that, that's all they wanted to hear. So a problem, Kevin, is they don't seek out other forms of information.
Yeah.
They stay and they're more comfortable, maybe because it's confusing. I think maybe they also don't realize that many of these so-called leaders, and they were these people making, like, there are some people, Kevin, they don't want, their life now is the buffer zone. They don't want to go back to what their life was. If they walk through their town or go in a neighborhood, maybe someone recognized them. But this is where, what it reminds me of is on Sundays. There's a guy that during the week, he's a janitor, he's unemployed, whatever. But on Sunday, he paints his face and he puts on a helmet and he becomes the super fan, and people are high-fiving him, and he's got 70,000 people. He doesn't want to live outside of the stadium. That becomes the identity. That is their identity. Like some of the people that I see that walk with Karen, this is the most exciting thing that's ever. You're on court TV with one of them. This is the most exciting thing that's ever happened to them. That's
a really good point.
They're thinking of, I could get a reality show. I could end up in Hollywood. I could, people. They've never even dreamed they could be part of this. Number one, they don't want it to end. Number two, the moment any of those individuals say, it kind of doesn't make sense that Jen McCabe at 227 in home was Googling, I wonder how long till John freezes death and my brother-in-law's lawn. Oh, wait a minute, I'll go back to the basketball program. I mean, the moment you say that, boom, you're out.
Yeah.
And I'm very interested to hear your guests coming up on the cult
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
as I have kind of told you, whoever designed that, and I don't know if it was Alan Jackson, I don't know if it happened organic, but it's very, the pink are welcomed. I wear obviously the opposite of pink or blue. Suddenly they'll say intruder approaching. It's very Jonestown.
Mhm.
It's a real mind game. You can stay and be part of the group as long as you stay in the bubble that
Mhm.
everyone's lying. Jen McCabe Googled that at 227. The dog attacked him, blah, blah, blah. As long as you recite that,
Mhm.
then you're fine. The
Uh,
moment, if you show, there's a great book on what it's like that I read in North Korea, where family members give up other family
mhm.
members. It's so frightening of what they can do to the human mind. Where this
Yeah.
this man had to go to a work camp. His sister and mother gave him up to the authorities. I mean, it's brutal, but I would think they're so afraid of tactics of, did I see you doubting what Karen said? Or, I mean, it's so whacked.
Yeah.
God, what these people could have accomplished these 2 months of sitting down there listening to Rita and, this is much more than no, it's not much more than about Karen Reed. Or Nick Rocco, his quote in the Herald, this could be any one of us next. Well, anyone that has 9 drinks and drives an Lexus SUV, I guess it could be them next.
Yeah.
So that's where I come down on that.
That's a good point too. And I'll give you an example, John. So I've communicated with people since I've kept the door open for anybody for civil discourse, and over time, a lot of them do switch over, right? But one of the ones that was on the fence going back, say, I don't know, in the fall, and I said she was someone that was participating in the Free Karen Reed Facebook group, which was really the focus there.
Right.
And I said, I want to challenge you to do this. Go into that group and post this. I said, I'm going to give you what to say. And you paste it in there. But basically, it was something to the effect of, I 100% believe that Karen Reed is innocent, but I have this question, and see what happens. And she posted it, and she was attacked by a swarm.
What was the
No
question?
question. I don't
What was
remember,
the
but
question?
it didn't.
Oh,
It wouldn't even matter because
yes.
no questioning is allowed.
Right.
No questioning is tolerated. It's not enough to just, so even though she prefaced it by saying I 100% believe that Karen is innocent, it didn't matter. You have to buy into all of their theories or they're going to attack. And it's just that's cult-like behavior to me, but
Oh, 100%. 100%, and they get confused and they don't want to come out. I mean, I feel bad for people, family members that are related to people that have to listen to this at a cookout or graduation party. And again, the people can recite all the details. So we all know it by now, the solo cups and so forth. But at this point, I don't know if there's enough. I think the trial took too long, and I think they may have the jury, Kevin, to be honest, I think they may be frightened to deliver a verdict and feel maybe we could skate out of this if we're hung and we don't deliver a verdict. I think that's what I think is going on. I think
is there also a risk of temptation here where a juror wants to sell a book or wants to be a hero or wants to go on the Turtle Boy show? Is that part of the risk here too? And so not just fear, but there's the carrot and the stick, and the carrot could be sometimes the problem too.
Yeah, I don't know if it's tough to tell. There's only one or two, actually. I think there's several of them that would have no interest in doing interviews or anything like that. I
Yeah.
don't see, sometimes when I've covered something like that, you see someone come in on a Monday and they maybe have a new hairstyle that they didn't have before. They start dressing a little bit differently. They're getting noticed and they're starting to realize, like, hey, maybe this is something that could, I'll be a star from this.
Yeah.
I'm going to get to
Yeah.
be on the Good Morning America. I'm going to get to be on, the
Yeah.
Today Show. So I'm going to get to do those types of things. I'm not sure. I think I only see like one or two. I think exhaustion, this also, you can't ignore what their family could be saying, which is,
Right.
a spouse, whoever, go cautious, that we saw, you get them paranoid. I think I saw a strange car at the end of the driveway. I mean, you don't know. I mean, many years ago, there were people that would have to decide, am I going to testify against a known criminal mob figure, or like who knows what could happen. That's where the witness protection program came into. I haven't heard anyone mention, by the way, the witness protection program or like a juror protection.
Oh man, we're gonna need that for jurors. Unbelievable.
Protect that.
Unbelievable.
It's interesting that they didn't extend the witness protection program, not that I'm aware of, because to all the witnesses here. You know what else? I just want to mention this. I am appalled. Jen McCabe, the Alberts, they're not public people. I cringe when I see them attacked on different platforms. There's someone that keeps doing videos about them on TikTok. They're not public people. They didn't ask for this. They're just people that happen to be witnesses. They're not even witnesses really in a murder trial. I mean, I know we say that, but it's really just a drunken hit and run with death resulting. That's what it is. So right. They're not trying to be stars. They're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to do the right thing by someone who they were friendly with, which John O'Keefe. If it was, can you imagine? I mean, Brian Albert didn't even really know John O'Keefe. The boyfriends, they didn't know him at all. The boyfriends of some of the kids involved with this, and what their life was like before and after. And we could all talk about that. There's going to be ramifications after this. Between the lawsuits are starting immediately, I think she is going to obviously face other charges. But right now, if I had to guess, I mean, I wasn't wrong when I thought they were going to find her guilty. But what I think is also crept in is if the judge could do it over, I mean, as much as we've all enjoyed it, having it televised, I mean, what would this be like if it wasn't on television? And it wasn't. I mean, it's a different type of trial, completely different, as a matter of fact. I think if you didn't have Jackson, and if she could have reined it in, I believe this could have been a 5-week trial. And in hindsight, I think they needed even the buffer zone farther away. And I don't know about sequestering the jurors, because then they feel sometimes like they're in a prison. But
yeah, I agree.
The people, they are spread all over the streets. And and I'll also say this, they don't follow the rules of the buffer zone. It's constantly a problem. When I'm trying to broadcast and do different things, they come up, they want to, they pick you out. I don't instigate conversation with them. They constantly want to talk about it. You don't know what you're talking about, blah, blah, blah. They're very confident on things that were disproven. It really wears on your patience, to be honest with you. I mean, I can be a patient person, but when it's 90 degrees and these people are just rehashing over the same type of stuff and they want to just keep talking about it, it does press your patience. But just getting back inside the courtroom, I think that's going to be the key. I think what's really going to be key here is how the judge is going to handle this. And I think she's done a remarkable job. I do, in a very difficult situation. She's given a lot of rope to the defense, probably more than they deserve. I think even her patients were pushed with Karen last week, who was just so repulsive and so crazed. But I think, and I'd be curious when you talk with Kevin, other than strong arm tactics, what has a judge done to assure the jurors that despite what's going on outside, they need to follow the law. And it's not easy, because it's just such an odd dynamic. It's things we've talked about. Members of the media that are not with the prosecution. I've never covered a case like that before, that they're rooting for the defendant. I get it. By the way, there's also something I should tell you. Again, I'm not going to name names.
John, I want to bring up my next guest, so we got to kind of wrap it up. We're at 7.
Wrap up.
I
want to say one more quick thing, and that is, there are people, it's very clear to me, their relationship with David Yannetti and Alan Jackson, it does affect their coverage, because it's very important to them to continue to have access to these individuals. And I think they do it in sacrificing some of their coverage. So we'll do it with that. Kevin, you have such a great show. Excellent.
John, where can people find you? Because people ask me all the time.
Best way to find me is go to my website, depetro.com. You can, no eyes, depetro.com. You can listen to the radio show that way. And there's all my links to social media, whether it be YouTube or X or Facebook or Instagram or YouTube, all of it right there at depetro.com.
Okay, great. Thank you, John, and we'll see you
Thanks,
soon.
Kevin.
I actually was
Okay.
going to send out a camera crew for you tomorrow, but he's in Florida. I wanted him to kind of help you
Oh,
out
wow.
and do some, but
All right.
so
I'm live on Court TV tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock.
all right, thank you. That's the Julie Grant
Right.
show for everybody
Julie
that's not sure.
Grant.
So Julie Grant, 8
Preaching.
o'clock. Thank you,
Yep.
John. All right, so I'm going to bring in, I'm very excited about this next guest. Let me give her an introduction a little bit first. So her name is Vanessa Rodriguez Vargas. And I don't know what these letters stand for, but MCCS, LMHC, she can maybe, but she explained to us, but she's a psychodynamic clinician, certified clinical supervisor, psychoanalysis, society and culture. Some of these words are too big for me to say. Hopefully she won't give me too many big words either. But she has kind of a fascination, something that she's been studying with cults and social media phenomena and those kind of things. So that's in particular what we're bringing her on. So this is Vanessa Rodriguez Vargas. Hi, Vanessa. Very nice to meet you.
Hello. Hello. Thanks for having me.
Let me take this little sign off here. All right, let's get that. Oh, hi. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So the first question I wanted to ask you is, so I know one of the things you've talked about or studied is cults, but there's also another phenomenon.
I just want to explicitly say that it's not about cults, but more so group dynamics. So within psychoanalysis and just within human interactions in general, we are all hardwired to make connections with other people, which has to be in the form of a group. So technically what I focus on is the interpersonal dynamics, the language, everything of that nature that creates a group. And it's usually based off of like a single belief. So sometimes people get together based off of, a shared interest or having a shared hatred of someone. We've all seen that before. So it usually just starts off there.
And obviously there's a spectrum of things too. It's not always a clean line where something becomes just kind of ordinary human phenomena, the need to belong to something, or situations where we have confirmation bias, where you start to cross into an area where you're now starting to have trouble perceiving reality or act in a rational way. So those are the things that you'll be able to talk about. But going in just along that lines, what would be the difference between the social forces behind a cult and a witch hunt or that kind of hysteria? What would be the differences in that?
Well, it depends on who's getting called a witch and who has the pickaxe, it really depends. And so usually there's a really good philosopher, Max Horkheimer, and he talks sort of about how the people who are from the upper echelons of society, they're the ones that get to deem what reason is, what's the law, what do we have to all do in order to follow things. And if that's coming from a bigger body like the government, then of course we're all going to listen to it. But if there's something there that's kind of doubtful, so let's say something from Trump's campaign, for lack of a better example, then you can sort of attack that, and it's sort of easy to deconstruct and say that, there are different things that influence a group. And I think you also brought up something very good, that anything can be called a cult, anything can be called a group. It just depends on who's calling what, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I guess where you'd want to focus on is, where does something become a problem, where it can either create dysfunction for the individual and have a negative effect on their lives, or something that has a more negative effect at a society level. So for instance, like you said, there are larger forces, like for instance, Maoist China was, I guess, a cult that involved, several hundred million people. Whereas you got Jim Jones, which is something that involves several thousand people, or maybe even several hundred at the end. So what are some of the forces here? Where are some of the lines? Go into that.
You can sort of think about it almost like a symptom. So Freud and a lot of other philosophers are really trying to figure out how to think about society. And so initially they thought about it as the individual, like, okay, this person's depressed because they sleep all day and don't want to go to work. Okay, But what about in a larger context? Well, let's say, for example, and I'm going to say this because I'm Spanish. Well, a lot of people might say that we like to take naps because we have a word that is about taking naps and it's part of culture. Siesta. Okay. But I mean, like you said, there's a bunch of different things happening at the same time, but it really depends on the sense of belonging and what the person in the group is willing to give up for that sense of belonging. So, I mean, last year, for example, the movie Barbie came out, and what color were they all wearing? Pink. And, you know, they really enjoyed being, you know, nostalgic about their childhood, getting to watch something all over again, but they're not actually playing with Barbies anymore. They still get to be exposed to it. So, I mean, even now with what little that I've seen about the Karen Reed case is it looks very similar, the images, the optics of it, but the goal is very, very different. So now I'm going off on a tangent, but basically what I'm trying to get at is you have to sort of understand the symptom. And then once you can sort of figure out what the symptom is, you need to figure out, okay, what is the space that it's happening in and what is the context that it's happening in? Because I can make a comparison that, you know, actually, I think your previous guest made this comparison that it was similar to the OJ case, but obviously they're two very different cases. So they have to be considered in the space and the context that they occurred in. So,
what are some of the social forces that you've studied in psychology and psychiatry and in psychoanalysis that lead people that apply in the modern world in a unique way, such as social media? How does this work for people to lose their individuality or lose their sense of what is real and what isn't?
So I'm going to start off by talking about a few psych cases. So we're probably all familiar with the prison experiment, the shock experiment, and nobody's telling someone, hey, you need to shock this person with 1,000,000 volts, but you're going to do it anyways. Why? Because you want to belong. You want to be called the good boy, the good girl in a given situation. So you're going to give that stuff up. And same thing happened with the Solomon Asch experiment with all of the lines. There's 4 different people there, but only one of them knows how to, or not how to, but is the actual participant rather. And so there, all of the 4 lines that are written on a piece of paper, there's only one that's shorter. All of them are getting asked the same question. Which one do you think is the shortest? And it's very obvious, right? But the researcher is asking the participant last on purpose. So all of the other people say, okay, all of the longer lines are the shorter ones. And for the most part, and I'm making a rough estimate here, but 75 to 80% of the people that participated in it said that a longer line was actually shorter than everything else. Why is that? Well, because we all just want to belong. And if there is any type of doubt that there's something off, we either, one, automatically think, oh my God, is it me? Am I the problem? Or we think, okay, it's actually the group. And if it's the group, then why are we still in the group? We're going to leave that group instead. So there's a lot of things that go into it, but for the most part, I really do think that there's something that the person has to sacrifice and that group has that makes them want to stay, that makes them lose themselves, all sense of individuality, because they're getting something that they would not normally get in their everyday life.
I want to ask a question on that last experiment that you just talked about. That's a great example. So what percentage of those people, is there any data on this, that actually start to perceive the line in the wrong way? So they literally, their own minds are distorting the reality, or are they perceiving it correctly, but just giving the wrong answer in order to conform?
Well, some of them perceive it correctly, but obviously I'm not them. So potentially they could be somewhat psychotic, neurotic, and actually believe that a longer line is the actual shorter one that they need to call out. But
they don't have to be psychotic, right? Couldn't that be somewhat normal too? Or
Exactly. But that's also a good point, that everybody on the planet, including you and I,
Hmm.
is some varying degree of every single diagnosis in the DSM, but
Right.
there
Right.
are only certain things that get highlighted.
Yeah.
So, for example, this is the first time I've ever been on a podcast, let's say. So, obviously, I might be a little bit nervous, right? So, maybe that's the thing that is getting, shown right now.
Hmm.
But nobody knows me off the screen
It's
besides,
not. You're doing fine.
thank you, thank you. But I'm just saying that even off the screen, I'm going to be extremely different,
Yeah.
right? If
Mhm.
if I'm just walking through the streets of Boston and my patients might see me, I'm going to be extremely different.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there's a lot of things that go into play there as well. If you are really interested, highly recommend Jacques Lacan if you want to know more
Okay.
about that.
Yeah, so I'm definitely, to me, I've always been fascinated with this idea that where people, the lines of reality do, let's not even say broader. Let's use that example there from the Solomon one, where they shift a little bit. Now, maybe someone might say, well, I'm not gonna, my lines of reality are never gonna blur so much that I would misperceive the length of a line. But in other regards, maybe political or ideology or just something, events in the news or something like that, if you see enough people saying something on social media, you're shifting something that may not be as obvious, but it's really a thing you would not have seen reality in that way without the
It
social
has to
influence.
happen over time,
Yeah.
right?
And what about action? Does some of this, like, I remember seeing stuff when I was in college on this. This involved cognitive dissonance too, but the idea, once you take small step of action in the wrong direction through cognitive dissonance and the way you absorb this, and maybe you can explain to people what cognitive dissonance is. Eventually, you can end up doing something so maybe horrible, but certainly way much wronger than you ever would have saw yourself doing. But you got there through steps. So if you
Right.
could talk about that.
Yeah, it usually happens over time that, uh, what's it called? How do I want to put this? Uh, do you mind rephrasing the last bit of what you just said?
So yeah, so I think the way I remembered it in college was you start. Let's just say you start out doing something um, minor that wouldn't be necessarily. Let's say you're going to start. Let's say you're joining up in a group and they want you to become an agitator, and initially all they want you to do is to go and make too much noise outside of an establishment, and you're like, all right, that's not a big deal, and you do that. And then later on, instead of feeling guilty about it, your mind
Well,
absorbs it and,
then
and so eventually
let me
where you could do something more violent like bank robberies or something like that. Does that make
then let
sense?
me ask you, how are you defining cognitive dissonance?
So for me, it would be your mind wants to avoid anything that'll make it feel uncomfortable or result in an image of itself that makes you feel bad about what you think or what you do. So it starts to
So I
twist
think you're
reality in
talking
order to
about,
cover that.
but in that case, I think you're talking about something else. It's
Okay.
suppression. So cognitive dissonance is actually when you have two people and they have like two very different ideas of something. So it's like you have someone who has OCD, super clean, neat freak, and then you have someone who's super messy. Well, they're probably going to get into a lot of fights with each other, right? That
Mhm.
friction is the cognitive dissonance. It's almost like in psychoanalysis when they call it an internal conflict, which is also a symptom.
Mhm.
This is what gets magnified within the cognitive dissonance. It's basically just tension. So I think maybe that's could have also been where I was confused as to what you were
Okay.
asking.
Um, let's talk about hysteria, witch hunts, things like that, where people find themselves acting in a way under the forces of group psychology, maybe, right? That's something else you could go into. Acting in a way that they normally would not, and doing things that they would normally consider to be unethical. So, what are some of the forces in play there that lead people to do that? And how does it relate to the modern world with social media, too?
Well, I mean, in that case, with social media, people really need to identify with something and associate themselves with that one thing.
Hmm.
So if they can find it on social media, then they will truly believe that they have some sort of like parasocial relationship with either their celebrity or, let's say eye masks that come from slugs from, you know, Zimbabwe that's going to make you look like you're 20 again, right? So, I mean, it really depends in terms of, there was a really good theory, I think it's Bourdieu, he talks about field theory, that everybody has a specific amount of capital, and most of the times it's also symbolic, meaning the amount of education someone has, the accessibility to healthcare, things of that nature. And so depending on whether or not someone has all of this readily available, they're going to act differently online. So in terms of social media, for example, someone who may not have come from the most educated background or the wealthiest background might post things that sound or appear a little bit more tawdry online. But at the same time, they're sort of aspiring to be your, you know, the Kardashian clan type of what's the word? Inspiring type of character, or, you know, but at the same
An
time,
influencer, or
thank you. I
yeah,
was looking for it. Clearly, I
that's what
have
I
not been
thought.
on social media for a while, but, you know, they're trying to sort of become and embody these things, which is why even, for example, you know, young girls who are maybe 11 or 12 years old are now wearing more makeup than when I was 11 or 12 years old. So, I mean, it can sort of happen over a slow period of time, and then you start noticing all of these changes, but it's not going to happen very quickly, because I mean, you can even think about domestically abusive relationships. That doesn't happen, you know, very quickly. You need to sort of build up and have this type of cycle that, okay, if Kim Kardashian posts something about slugs that make her look 20, then I'm going to want that thing. Okay,
Right.
well, now the fascination with that is gone. So now it's time to go and get attached to something else. And based off of our parasocial relationships online, all of these items we really want. And then if we think, okay, well, if Kim K has this, what does she have? Like perfume brand, then if I smell like Kim K, then I could become as rich as Kim K. Just to put the example out there. Does that sort of make a little bit of sense?
Are kids today, because of this kind of stuff, more than in the past, growing up with a distorted sense of reality? Now, I know you might want to say, well, what's to say what reality is? But we can always debate certain aspects of it, but there is a reality there, right? 2 plus 2 does still equal 4. And, there is some foundational reality that we have as a common ground between us in order to function in the world. And it seems to me that more and more people are becoming distant from that. And I think social media contributes to that. But do you agree with that? Or do you have any comments on that?
I don't know about that. I might be a little bit biased because I work with a lot of psychotic people and neurotic people. But I mean, I don't know. I honestly think that with the advent of social media, having a more like anti-Oedipus type of view, what does that mean? Thank you for asking. It just sort of means that, you know, someone who is psychotic is probably seeing something or noticing something that your regular normal person would not. So it's worth paying attention to, but it's probably not going to be, you know, an objective truth that everybody needs to pay attention to, like 2 plus 2 is 4. Right? So, I mean, there's too many things happening all at the same time, I think, in terms of like what we really need to believe. But I think that this type of anti-Oedipus perspective or approach to something only shows us that potentially in a group dynamic, there are good things, sure, but there are also bad things. And those bad things that we notice aren't necessarily going to be the demise of a group or, you know, based off of what's on social media. So, I mean, what were you going to say?
No, but just along that lines, doesn't this, like, social media, as your people are just, it's kind of like algorithm driven in a sense, but also in the human mind, where you only want to hear things that reinforce what you already believe. So you hang around in echo chambers and you're never getting any contrary information. So you end up with a distorted impression of the world, I believe.
How boring is that?
That's become an increasing problem, I think.
Agreed,
You know,
agreed. But again, I mean, if you're trapped in an echo chamber, are you really learning anything? Are you really interacting with, the reality that you've been in for the majority of your life? Or are you in a simulation, a dream? Because if everything else is planned for you and you don't really need to have your own ideas, that's a bit boring.
do
That's
you?
that's a
No, I'm not encouraging it.
No, no,
I'm
no,
saying
no,
that's
no.
a
I'm just
problem. You
saying
know, yeah,
it is a problem. It's just a
yeah,
terrible way to live. And I think something your previous guest was pointing out in terms of jury, the people on the jury, it's a huge responsibility for sure. But they're going to have to protect the integrity of making a decision. And that's what needs to happen in any type of group. And if you think of America itself as a group, why aren't we all thinking about things in that type of way? Having a healthy amount of skepticism is actually a good thing rather than
right.
something to shy away from.
Yes, exactly. That's a practical part of reality. So if you're going to walk onto a used car lot, you should have some practical understanding that everything that salesman is going to tell you about these cars might not be 100% true. And I feel that now, as people live more in social media and less in the real world, they have a lesser healthy understanding of a lot of these things in life. Are you encountering that with any of your patients or?
Well, of course, we live in the age of anxiety. So, I mean, I was mentioning Lacan earlier because everyone has like a true self and a false self, and we never really understand 100% of that true self. And
Yeah,
so we get to control what that true self might look like on social media, which is
right.
kind of convenient. And I mean, how
So
nice is
it's kind
that?
of a fake avatar then too, right?
Right, right. But at the same time, there's a lot of anxiety that's going to get riddled up because we have to maintain that narrative all the time. And that can
Mm.
also be tiring. Imagine if you cannot be anyone besides Yellow Cottage Tales. That's
I don't even
nice.
like being that.
Right, right. But everybody needs to have like
Yeah,
a lot of things that make them them. You can't just always be consistent. So
right. So what about the need for certainty? Is that something? So a lot of the people in the Karen Reed movement are of a certain age. So I think maybe most of them tend to be 40s, 50s, 60s, kind of all kind of a generation there. Is, first, here's another example. So to me, when I've looked at hysterias in the past, like, so for instance, the witch hunt of Salem in 1692, that came after a few years after King Philip's War, which wiped out 1/4 of the population in colonial New England. The 1921 Red Scare that came just a couple years after the bird flu wiped out. The Spanish flu wiped out a large percentage of or not a large percentage, but many, many millions of people. And so we now have this Karen Reed kind of phenomena, which comes just a couple years after COVID and the pandemic and all that the shutdowns and everything. Is there like is this insecurity driving some of this stuff here, or is there other aspects that are making people need that security?
oh, you mean if the women in pink outside of the Dedham courthouse have some sort of insecurity? And
Well, yeah. I mean, is there a connection to recent historical events? Is there something else that's going on here? Do you think?
well, if it has to do with historical events, then I think a really good book for everybody to read is by Simone de Beauvoir, The Second Sex. And I mean, she's basically arguing that women have been secondary to men probably since the beginning of time. So this case is very, very significant because now women have a voice. Doesn't really matter who Karen Reed is, doesn't
Mm,
really matter what she did in this case. The
right.
fact of the matter is that she's a woman, and
Mm,
a lot of women can identify with another strong woman.
excellent point.
Again,
Yes.
doesn't really matter what the hell she did, but if let's say a middle-aged woman living in Dedham is, bored with her life, all she has to do is take the kids to school, make sure they have something to eat and,
Mm,
have fun, blah blah blah. Okay, that's a very cyclical way of living, and maybe outside of their front doorstep, is the actual courthouse. And my God, how fun is that? While the kids are out at school, you get to go to this courthouse and just, protest with a bunch of your friends. That sounds a bit nice, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think sometimes there are people who might be bored and need something to do. There are some other people that might identify with Karen Reed because she is a woman, because, she is getting some sort of spotlight. She is now, let's say, a Boston celebrity or whatnot, and her face is everywhere. So if her face is everywhere, what about that woman who's, a middle-aged mom living in Dedham? That would be nice if her face was somewhere all around the city because she was doing something powerful for women in general.
Let me
So
build on that. I like that. Let
yeah,
me build on that just a little bit, Vanessa. So you're talking about people that maybe feel trapped in their life, and so of course we've all felt that at different times. Maybe not you. You're still young, but all of us in our lives feel trapped at some point, and it's a pretty potent negative feeling. And I think, like I said, people maybe even felt more trapped because of the COVID lockdowns, and now that makes them identify with someone like Karen, who seems very much trapped, right? She's a figure who's now on trial here, perhaps facing powerful
but these
forces.
women are different. They're bored because they didn't find anything else better to do. Okay.
Right.
And I think within psychoanalysis, boredom itself is the aggression of not being able to do what you actually want to do. So maybe this woman in Dedham, in this hypothetical example, all she really wanted was to go out on a date with her husband. Okay. But if that's not able to happen, well, here's something else that she can occupy her time with. So it's also based off desire, what people want in their life, what they're not getting, and whether or not they can find it readily available somewhere else. And if you're thinking about these types of things in a very impulsive type of way, well, this Karen Reed case has been happening, so why not just jump on that instead of, let's say, going to a Williams Sonoma and learning how to bake a tiramisu, right?
Right.
So
right.
I think that goes back to, the amount of symbolic capital that someone has, how much they want to invest in whatever their preferences, their desires are, and then go from there. But if they're not going to really invest in themselves, they're going to invest in a group, such as, let's say, all of the Karen Reed supporters, by all means, go for it. But even then, they're only identifying with something that group has that they are not getting from their regular life, for a lack of a better word.
What are some of the, I know you've already talked a little bit about this, but specifically some of the forces of group psychology that goes on? What are some of that helps lead towards the building of first just ordinary healthy groups, but then at some point it becomes unhealthy and self-destructive?
So initially, you just need a leader. Whoever the leader is doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things because it usually relies on the first follower. And if that first follower comes around, then it's easier to get more, right? So in terms of the leader, you can sort of think about them as the amalgamation of the group culture itself. And then once this person is sort of put on a pedestal as that leader, then what happens? So everybody else in the group will identify with the charisma of that person, all of the good stuff that they're talking about, the vigor in which they're talking about it in. Fantastic. But then, it might, let's say, turn terrible if instead of having a more constructive mantra for the group, if it becomes more destructive, then everything sort of will fall out of whack.
Right.
And usually it gets there because someone might try to challenge the leader. Somebody might try to, kill off the leader. Somebody might try to, leave the group. And even leaving the group would threaten the integrity of it. So, for example, in the movie 12 Angry Men, you just need that one guy to ask one question that makes everybody jump on them.
Mhm.
And that person is still the leader, even though, there's a different juror who's number one. But
Mhm.
even then, it's all about the charisma. Everyone's
Mhm.
listening to only the person that they can sort of see some semblance of hope, let's say. But even then, it might turn destructive once the desire of like maintaining that group becomes either intolerable, unmanageable, or people are trying to leave the group. And if the group is not growing in a way that the leader wants, or let's say the cabinet of whoever's surrounding that leader, it might be destroyed very, very easily through the demise of other people, the violence of other people rather.
So on the subject of leaders, I can see that if a leader has charisma, as you say, it's very difficult for kind of everybody to resist that to a degree. But it seems to me, I haven't had a well-formed theory of this, but I want to hear what you, with your professional training, might think of this. That when I look at somebody, the leader in this particular movement does not have what I would describe as charisma. It doesn't have appeal, personal appeal. I think most people actually kind of find him repulsive. However, what he does have is a wildly unchecked ego. And is there something about somebody with a wildly unchecked ego that a certain type of person finds appealing just on that basis alone, and almost is willing to submit their own ego to that? Does that make, is you see, have you ever seen anything like that?
Well, sometimes, yeah, narcissism can seem sexy in a way, but it's not really appetizing. It's not going to be fun for the person. You have to sacrifice every single thing that you do in exchange for affection or positive regard from the leader. And that's really, really terrible for the individual, because then
Mhm.
they don't matter. They're only going to be an extension of that leader.
Mhm.
And I mean, you see that a lot with what's happening with Kim Jong-un and, everybody else in North Korea. Well,
Mhm.
they're willing to give up their relatives and whatnot in exchange for being protected by whoever that leader is. So earlier you're talking about how groups can get destructive. Well, if that leader has all the charisma in the world, that's fantastic. But if that leader doesn't have a plan or a goal of getting there, it can really hurt everybody else.
Right.
And, you know, uh, like I said before, narcissism can be sexy, but at the same time, like you said, to what varying degree? And it can sort of become destructive when the person becomes a megalomaniac, or,
Mhm.
they have to push the boundary to the point where it's like saying, I'm going to ruin your podcast and I'm not going to care anything about it. Well, that's kind of shitty for me to say,
Mhm.
and if I have no regard towards you, what's the point of me even being here, right?
Mhm. So what
So
makes
it
it sexy? Because I don't, because that's something myself that I feel like I don't look at someone else that's a narcissist and it doesn't draw me. But obviously, there's some people that it does draw.
well,
What is it makes
what's
it sexy?
what's your favorite band or artist, like someone you listen to?
Nowadays, I mean, I listened to U2 growing up. You
All
know,
right, well, every Bono, he has to have something narcissistic about him in order to get on stage.
yeah.
It's not pathological, but he needs it in order to get on stage.
Mhm.
Personally, I don't think he's the sexiest person on the planet, but it's kind of attractive if someone can get on stage, sing
Mhm.
as if nobody's watching,
Right.
and feel comfortable. Like that is fantastic. But there are some people who might take advantage of having these types of leadership positions.
Right. But that's someone with charisma. I would say that's a good example. Bono, who loves to be on the center of attention, be on the stage like that. But I'm just more interested in those kind of people. So, for instance, in the leader of the movement is the free carry movement is a guy called Turtle Boy, calls himself Turtle Boy, and he asks his followers. It actually it doesn't have any more meaning than there is a famous sculpture in the park in Worcester of a naked man I'm sorry, naked boy that's riding a turtle. I don't know why it was there. It was put there 150 years ago. Probably has
Well, now we
some.
know what he thinks about Karen Reed.
Yeah, but he has called himself Turtle Boy for more than 10 years, so we can't read too much into that. I think it's just kind of a famous thing from Worcester. But he expects his followers to call him daddy, and many of them do. So what does
Why?
that tell you there? Why would somebody want to call another adult? There's even a reporter in Fall River, something who's covering the Karen Reed trial, who calls him daddy. What is going on here that someone want to call another adult human being daddy?
What is it in exchange for? Because
You tell me.
I'm sorry, I'm just so confused why anybody would want to be called that.
But that need to submit to somebody else's ego, the narcissist
right,
to want
but
to
it's
submit to
almost it. So is it that Turtle Boy possesses some sort of godly power, like
Yes,
or
he does, and that godly power is this: he very self-consciously understands that he has a large social media following, and anybody that crosses him, he will unleash that social media onto that person instantly in order to try to destroy them in a social media way. So that's his power, and his only power.
that's yikes. But
Welcome to Massachusetts.
yikes, I guess. But the fact that he can sort of galvanize a large group of people, and then they don't even understand why he's asking them to, unleash their aggression onto anyone. That's a bit odd, don't you think? Because
It's
then
very odd, but yeah.
but then they just lose all sense of individuality and just do whatever the hell the group says.
Yeah.
And it just sounds as though these people don't have any type of opinion. But again, returning to my example of like a mom and dad, they must not have anything else better to do, and neither does he, to exercise this amount of power onto people that he's never even met. And this is also where a parasocial relationship can come in, because they're very strong when you never meet the person, that you feel sort of enthralled to do whatever that person says in exchange for some sort of recognition. So I don't know anything about Turtle Boy, but let's say he writes on his website, blog, whatever it is, oh, so-and-so did this, this, and this for the campaign or whatnot. Well, that would probably feel really nice for the individuals that actually go into action, because now they're getting recognized for doing something. And in the grander scheme of things, they're also getting recognized within this case. And if they're just some regular person that works at Home Depot, how nice is that they now can sort of have some sort of purpose.
Right. Gives you more meaning and lifts you above what you perceive your status. Absolutely. And what bothers me the most in this case, but not just in this case, but it's only more on full display here, is to the extent that people are willing to dismiss really good evidence in favor of something that feels like a belief that has more appeal to them.
Because potentially they might be basing it off of their own personal experience. So, for example, and I hate bringing this up, but after the Me Too movement came out, there's obviously going to be a lot of women who come out and start talking about how they've been sexually abused, sexually assaulted. Well, now that this has come out, are there just more and more people who may be identifying with like the possibility of their aggression being blown out of proportion, that they run over or they have a fantasy rather of wanting to run over their significant other? Okay. So now they can sort of engage in this discourse with Karen Reed, but be completely separated. They don't have to directly experience, let's say, any of the stuff that gets presented in the case, but they can still have the fantasy. And this is sort of the phenomenon even of like reality TV, that a lot of people really enjoy watching it because they don't have to do any of the stupid stuff that happens on reality
Right.
TV, but they can sort of consume it from afar.
Right. So it's a kind of escapism, basically.
Right.
Escapism, but more a better
Voyeurism.
form. Oh yes. So which is like a better than say escapism into watching Game of Thrones, because it's fantasy and it's unrealistic, but reality TV is much, you can identify it with it more.
I feel as though there's some sort of perversion involved in it, because everybody that's watching the case wants to see somebody squirm. They want to see somebody get caught, and that's it. All right. But at the same time, everybody who's just is sort of like unleashing their own aggression onto someone that they've never even met before, or a situation that they've never even encountered themselves. That's a recipe for disaster, honestly.
So let's take some examples from your work. Obviously, you wouldn't mention a specific patient, but maybe you'll have someone in mind, and just thinking, if you have someone that their problem is for their own other emotional reasons, or whatever, they're misperceiving reality in a way that is somewhat self-destructive. How do you get them to look through and start to see reality better?
That's like a trick question. It really depends, because I'm trying to think of a case, but I worked with someone who was highly psychotic before, and they said a lot of very outlandish things, let's say, and they were very grandiose in nature and their content. But even then, depending on the severity of the psychosis, it's very difficult to get them out of that narrative or fantasy, however you want to call it, because to them, that's their reality. If they tell me that they're married to U2, Bono, or whoever, I have to take that as is. If they want to tell me that they're the mom of the Queen of England, even though she just died not too long ago, I have to take that as a fact. But then afterwards, you have to deconstruct all of the language for it to make sense. But for the most part, if someone is highly psychotic, or they lose themselves completely in a group, that they no longer matter in terms of their name, that is the crux of the issue here.
But what about, you must have patients that are not that severe, where they're really having bad breaks from reality like that. So they're not psychotic, but just people that are otherwise normal, but maybe need a little help,
Usually those people do not stay that long, because
so you get the hard cases.
So I actually had a guy come into my office when I first started, and comes in, he's telling me, I'm a celebrity, I've grown up in Boston all my life, I've never heard of this person, I don't know anything about him. And because I kept sort of saying, what do you do, and things of that nature, because I didn't already know it, because he was a celebrity, then I'm the one that gets punished for not having known this. And then those people will usually leave. They don't normally stay. And I did this intake with sort of going over it further, because I wanted to make sure I had everything. And I mean, even then, you can't really control it, because the information I got from outside, or let's say collateral contact, even then, like it's not all of the same story. I'm not getting all of the same things. So I don't really think that'll help answer your question. I'm sorry.
Right. What about maybe people, here's maybe an example. So people you may have treated that are not psychotic, but they've committed crimes. So you're trying to make them see, and maybe that's not your job to do that anyways, but I don't know. You're trying to, so they don't believe they're the Queen of England, but you're trying to make them process reality a little bit better in order to impact their lives in a more positive way.
Well, I mean, again, like it really is on a case-by-case basis. and
Yeah.
I can't really give you too much information in terms of all of that because of HIPAA.
Yeah. Right.
So, I mean, I'm sorry, I can't really answer that
Yeah.
question. And plus, the cases that I have, even if they do have any type of legal thing going on, I
Yeah.
don't feel comfortable answering, if
That's
I'm being
okay. I understand.
honest.
I'm just looking for general answers, but I understand. I kind of ran out of questions. This was my fault, Vanessa. I was trying to prepare for so many guests tonight that I little ran low on questions. Is there anything else that you want to talk about then? About this case or about anything? Anything at all related to your work?
I don't know.
Podcasting?
I mean, I've never been on a podcast, but
Mhm.
I am working on some writing right now about like film analysis and how it can be used within a more clinical context, how to
Oh, okay.
understand a situation and things of that nature using a lot of philosophy. So personally, I obviously don't look like Freud. I do not have the same, perspectives or approaches that Freud has. I'm a bit more eclectic, so getting to do all of that stuff in a piece of
Well,
writing
I'm
using.
I'm a screenwriter, believe it or not. So anything I'd be interested in. So are there any films that you've looked at specifically and tried to apply some of that theory? Or
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
interested.
So Uh, for my writing, the film that I decided to focus on was actually Everything Everywhere All at Once. And watching it 5 different times in different contexts
Hmm.
sort of really shaped how I interpreted those films.
Hmm.
So I'm sure even in the Karen Reed context, you're going to have very different responses when you ask someone's opinion about it, if they're actually there at the Dedham courthouse, if they're across the street at the pizza place because they just really want to see it, at home, watching it on TV,
Hmm.
watching it through little clips online, or
Hmm.
engaging in it through podcasts only. You're going to have a different reaction based off of how you're consuming the entire thing itself.
Yeah.
So I'm focusing on that, but using a lot of Martin Heidegger theory. So primarily the fourfold and how things can be broken up in terms of the earthly qualities of an object, the divinities who may have like given you the idea of creating something, the mortals, us, and the sky. So, like the covering that provides the space in which we can interact with objects. And using the fourfold is a good way of sort of understanding, defining an object or, the person who's sitting across from me in my office, things of
Right.
that nature.
Right.
And,
Okay.
and with film, obviously.
All right. Well, thank you. So, and if this is there anything else you want to tell us about yourself before we sign off, or and I'll bring on Kevin when he gets here.
Uh, I don't really have much else to say. I don't know if you accept questions from the audience or whatnot, but
Oh, we can. Yeah. Let's bring this tail light out. See if anybody has any questions. So, what would be your specific field of expertise, I guess, related to stuff that they might be interested in?
so I do a lot of psychoanalysis, studying society, studying culture, um, how like things can sort of affect the individual, um, but mostly focusing on the importance of positionality, intersubjectivity,
Mhm.
and obviously culture.
So,
I
I
know that's
did.
a huge, a huge term, though. Huge umbrella.
Um, I didn't even know psychoanalysis was still that commonly used. What about related to Jungian philosophy, and even just so the idea of the shadow, is that something that could be relevant to the Karen Reed case too? Like you mentioned, Karen Reed maybe represents to a lot of people, she's a fighter. She's fighting for her freedom. Is that they perceive that's the shadow and inside them they want to get out, or maybe they are getting out now by going down and shouting and making a lot of noise in front of the court. Is I'm not a Jungian, I'm not a psychologist, so obviously I'm probably getting ahead of my skis a little
Well,
bit. So
no, Not necessarily. I just think that, like, in psychology, even in philosophy, everybody's talking about the same thing, but they're doing it with different language. So you're talking about a shadow self. I might be talking about Lacan's version of a false self, right? And, we're talking about symptoms. It could be called something completely different. So there's a lot of things happening in terms of semantics, but I really think it depends on like what truly sticks for you as the individual. So
Yeah.
when I've been studying psychoanalysis, ironically, probably not, I'm way more attracted to using existentialism and phenomenology as part of my practice, and it works for me.
Hmm.
And sort of combining it with psychoanalysis just makes sense to me.
Okay. All right. Well, great. Thank you, Vanessa. I really appreciate you being here. And so we'll do it again sometime if you'd like. And this is Vanessa Rodriguez Vargas, who comes highly recommended. How do people get in touch with you if they want to reach out to you?
So you can Google my name, Vanessa Rodriguez Vargas. I currently work at ThriveWorks in Boston. So if you'd like to work with me clinically, you can send an email, but for the most part, you can find me there. All right.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Vanessa, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Have a good one. Stay safe.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Okay, guys, thank you. So Kevin Mahoney will be on sometime around 8. And so I did not have time to reach out to everybody and see what questions they had. Everything is always a lot going on this weekend because we thought it was important to try to address the jury. And I have other things going on in my own life, obviously, but working hard to try to pull this off. We had John on earlier. Although, John, it was like I just can just kind of let him go, though I don't really have to do much work to prepare for that. But so we have about 6, 7, 8 minutes before Kevin gets here. So I'm going to look at questions here and see if anybody had anything especially relevant for that. So go back to some of these. Heisenberg said that Karen will never get a. By the way, Heisenberg, I love your uncertainty principle. So Karen will never get a jury to find her not guilty due to the mountain of evidence against her. We could see Karen versus Turtle Boy in the final chapter. Yeah, will they turn on each other? I know they haven't yet. So, but Turtle Boy interestingly posted something within the last couple of days, basically saying that whatever happens with this jury, Karen Reed is still innocent. I think he knows that acquittal is out of the question. I think he knows that. So it's either some guilty on one of the 3 charges or a hung jury. That would be my best guess. Mira, thank you for reminding us. Kate is making T-shirts for whoever can go support the John O'Keefe family at the courthouse. So there are a lot more people going to the courthouse tomorrow. And wow, yeah, tomorrow is Monday. So people are standing up, and that was enabled by Kate and her friends being there last Friday. People are standing up and realizing that we are facing a mob that I'm not trying to generalize everybody in the mob as bad people or as unintelligent people. No, but there is a mob. When people join a mob, they start to take on characteristics and do things that they wouldn't otherwise do. And that's why mobs are notoriously dangerous. And one of the things that mobs are resistant to is any kind of reason, any kind of common sense. And so Kate has led a group down there that is standing up for the people that are victims to this kind of mob behavior over the last year. This is really a modern hysteria. It's a modern witch hunt. It has all the aspects of it. And I think a couple of years from now, people are going to look back and say, why the hell did people fall for that? I think many of the people out there now wearing the pink shirts are going to say, it wasn't me. I didn't do it. So I think that it's been hard for a lot of people to find ways to resist that. But Kate has led a group, and that group is growing, and there's going to be more people out there Monday that are leading the resistance into that. And Frank mentions, what was Frank's? Should have been in a Buddy Cianci Providence. He must have been talking earlier when John was on. John covered a lot to do with Buddy Cianci. And we'll get in one more here before I bring in Kevin. So Frank also says, odd thing, my glasses are always the last place I look. I wonder why. I know the entire state of Rhode Island did it. So Frank has a very interesting history in Rhode Island that he was talking about. Very tragic experience. He was a regular at the station bar. He was not there that night when it happened, though. But one of his good friends was a survivor and was in the hospital from that. All right, so let me bring in defense attorney and friend Kevin J Mahoney. Hey, Kevin.
Good evening, Kevin. How you doing?
Excellent. Oh, your audio sounds truly excellent tonight. Really, really good. I haven't had time to prepare much, but I think one of the things that you wanted to talk about was the idea that physics somehow disproves that John injuries could have been caused or were caused by a vehicle. Do you have anything that you want to go into on that?
I think what I would feel more comfortable in discussing is how lawyers interact with experts so that we get a better idea, a better context for within which these experts testified on behalf of the defense.
Excellent.
Okay, so I know that Wendy Murphy has been out repeatedly and posted and on Twitter and criticized defense attorneys and the experts that they hire. And as I said on your show previously, I'm sure there are experts who, if you pay them enough money, will tell a jury whatever you want them to tell you, whatever you want them to tell the jury.
Right.
Okay. But the experts that I've interacted with have all been legitimate. And here's what I suspect, or let me just explain to you, I think a better way to go about this would just be explain how I interact with an expert. So let's say that I've worked with an expert before, maybe I haven't. I contact the expert and I explain a little bit about the case and the kind of expert opinion I'm hoping to obtain.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the expert will tell me right from the beginning, is this something that he feels he can handle, or is this something that he would think I might be better off contacting someone else? Okay, if it progresses past that initial portion of the conversation, then we'll talk a little bit more about the evidence. And then I will send the evidence off to him and he can evaluate the evidence and then give me an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he calls me up and he's evaluated the evidence, and he's going to say to me, I can say the following. And then he gives me his opinion. I might then say, if it falls short of what I'm looking for, I'm going to say, well, can you say A? He says, no, I cannot say A. Okay. So now I have a list of priorities. So then I might drop down a little bit, another level. Well, could you say B? I don't think I could say B. Okay. Well, would you be able to testify to C? I could testify to C with certain conditions. And then at that point, I have to make a decision as to whether or not I actually want to retain this expert, because perhaps he's not going to be as useful to me as I was hoping. And the reason I think that this is somewhat significant here with regard to the experts, the accident reconstructionists who testified on behalf of the defense, is that if you consider their testimony and the scope of what they claim they were asked to do, it is difficult for me to believe that the U.S. Attorney's Office contacted accident reconstructionists and did not ask them to do a reconstruction. Right? They didn't actually do a reconstruction per se.
Yeah.
What they did was they probably gave him an opinion. And then I'm guessing, this is just pure speculation, but it would be typical for an attorney to then work down the list as I explained to you. So maybe he got down to the portion of the list where it says, well, could you testify that the injuries were inconsistent with being hit by a Lexus?
Mhm.
And he'd say, yes, I could testify to that. Or could you testify that the damage to the vehicle was inconsistent with hitting a body? And he says, yes. The other expert says, yes, I could testify. I think that was Dr. Wolf. Yes, I could testify to that.
And would they
Okay, so now they
would
have the scope of
would Kevin, just real quick, would they phrase the question that way, or for legalistic reasons, would it be more of a dog whistle kind of way, where they say, was the accident consistent with the injuries of a pedestrian of a vehicle strike, with the understanding that those guys know what he's looking for?
that is possible. And, I can't speak to how other attorneys interact with their experts. And, and also the other thing we have to keep in mind here is the U.S. Attorney's Office is a prosecutor. That's a prosecuting office. So they have different obligations than does a defense attorney. Right. And if I don't know the expert that well, it may be that I proceed more cautiously. And if I've worked with the expert in the past, maybe we can have a more frank discussion.
Right.
And then at some point, I will understand, and I'm sure the U.S. Attorney's Office understood what the parameters were that the experts felt that they could testify to.
Right.
And that's why they drafted the report. Now, I don't know whether or not they testified for the grand jury, but because they drafted a report, what is the purpose of the report? The report was issued, I believe, in February of 2024.
Yeah.
And by that point, I'm guessing, considering all the witnesses that had already testified before the grand jury, the U.S. Attorney's Office had to know that this investigation was going nowhere, that there was no conspiracy they were going to uncover. So why would you bring in an accident reconstruction team to issue an opinion long after you've already concluded that there is nothing here worth investigating? That's kind of strange also.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the other strange component to this, which is the U.S. Attorney's Office ordered these experts not to interact with the prosecution or the defense prior to the trial. Now, while they testified, it was clear to me and that they were trying their best to help the defense and undermine the prosecution. That was pretty obvious to me. So then you have to ask yourself, well, why? If the U.S. Attorney's Office is satisfied that there's no conspiracy and would have to believe that they are because nobody has been indicted, and they're permitting these experts to testify, then why are these experts molding their opinions around the defense theory? And theory is a very charitable way of putting this, because there really isn't much of a theory that the defense really could put forth.
Right.
It was just odd, though. And so that suggests to me, because they were obviously biased in favor of the defense, that perhaps it wasn't that Levy didn't want them talking to the defense attorneys. It was more that he didn't want them talking to the prosecution.
Mm-hmm. What would be the legal basis for making that restrict? What would be the legal basis for having that? Never heard of it, so it's all pretty much uncharted waters.
I have never heard of a prosecutor putting that kind of a condition on any assistance an expert might give in a criminal trial or in any trial.
Yeah.
I just simply heard of it because he wasn't a party to the lawsuit.
Right.
And so just to go a little bit further down that route, I had a murder case of, I don't know, 4 or 5, 10 years ago, whenever it was, and I needed to speak. I had gotten an opinion from a medical expert, a pathologist, about the cause of death.
Yeah. And
the Commonwealth's medical examiner, the pathologist, she had come out with a different opinion. And the prosecutor said, "Hey, call her up. She'll talk to you."
Mm-hmm.
So I had a very long conversation with the pathologist and realized that she was correct and my expert was not correct. So here we have a prosecutor who says, "Hey, talk to my expert." But here we have the U.S. Attorney's Office prohibiting a prosecutor, another prosecutor, from talking to an expert that he retained, and apparently was no longer going to be participating in any criminal investigation into this alleged conspiracy. It's very, very, very strange. I can make no sense of it.
By strange, I would say suspicious, but absolutely. Actually, Busty has a good question here. So I'm sure you've seen that Dr. Wolf, the first expert from the Arca company, his wife is in the Facebook group. This didn't come out until after he testified. But if there was a retrial, could this somehow be used to prevent him from testifying?
I don't know that the Commonwealth, let's say the Commonwealth filed a motion to prevent him from testifying because of some bias.
Yeah.
My guess that Judge Mahoney her ruling would be, well, you can bring that up during your cross-examination.
Right.
I don't really see that as a grounds for preventing the expert from testifying.
Right. Okay. No, I thought that was a good question, though, because it does. I agree. I mean, I anticipated your answer, but yeah, it does seem like there ought to be something that can be done for that. But like you said, that would have to come through on cross-examination. He's just going to say, well, that's my wife's opinion. It's got nothing to do with me, right? So I follow the physics and something like that.
You know, it's going to be interesting if there is a retrial, and let's say for the sake of argument that these two experts are called again, these two accident reconstructionists on behalf of the defense.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that Assistant DA Lally will obtain all the transcripts, or at least obtain transcripts of their prior testimonies in other matters where they were reconstructing a motor vehicle pedestrian collision. Be very interesting to see how they approached those investigations, what evidence they thought was important, and the conclusions they that evidence, and how they explained the process by which they reached their conclusions. I suspect, based on their testimony at the Karen Reed trial, that we might find that they had testified much differently. And that might be useful to Lally during cross-examination.
If we had, like I said, hypothetically, if there are jurors watching this, I know there are two general type of jurors that you may want to address them separately, but you might have jurors. Let's say there's a situation where 11 of them believe Karen is guilty of something, at the very least striking John, and they're dealing with a holdout. What would you advise the jurors to help convince the holdout? Or if you're addressing directly now the holdout yourself, what are some of the things that you might, I know it's unethical probably to do this, but we want that balance, because we know they're watching. If they are watching social media, most of what they're getting is from the other side. So what would you address? What would you say to those jurors?
Well, Mr. Linehan, as an officer of the court, I'm not really allowed to attempt to influence the jurors. Let me
rephrase the question then, Your Honor.
I'm not allowed.
Pretend the trial is over,
but I could say,
you want to convince those jurors.
I could say the following. There were points that I believe Lally could have raised or emphasized that perhaps he didn't. And if you'd like me to explain, or I could simply explain to you what happened.
Okay, please.
Okay, so they're at the bar. They travel over to the 34 Fairview Albert residence. They're parked out front, and they're there for a few minutes, right? I think everybody would agree that they're there for at least a few minutes.
Yep.
She knows, Karen Reed knows, that people inside that party are expecting them. I mean, they were just on the phone with Jennifer McCabe. So people are expecting them to go in. And I think that's really significant here. Why? Because they're arguing, they're fighting, and from the tone of her voice and the voicemail that she left, I mean, she sounded enraged. So one would think she was probably therefore enraged within the car if she's still enraged 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes later.
Right.
We know from the children that there's a documented history of fights between the two of them, and during those fights, Mr. O'Keefe usually departs in an effort to get away from her. So it makes sense that if they're in the middle of a fight and he doesn't want to fight with her, that he gets out of the vehicle. She is now enraged, and she throws it into reverse. Now, he may have, I think the accident reconstructionist, Dr. Wolf, was actually, I think he was onto something. I think maybe Officer O'Keefe actually broke the taillight with the glass. I think that's a really significant possibility here. Now, as she backs up, okay, she hits him. She had to know she hit him, because whatever exploded that taillight had to draw her attention. Plus, there had to be indications on her own, from the Lexus, alerting her to the fact that the taillight is now broken.
Right.
But here's that I thought that really could have hit home, is that she kept going. She had to keep going. To slow down from 24 miles an hour, she had to keep going for at least 30 feet? At least, okay?
She went a total of 62 feet, so yeah.
Okay, so she has got her headlights on. The headlights are functioning.
Yeah.
And he's now on the front lawn about 8 to 10 feet from the roadway.
Right.
How could she possibly not have seen him?
Right.
How could she possibly not have seen him lying there on the lawn? Now, she makes it, instead of getting out of her vehicle to check on him, right? Are you okay? To get him some help. If he needs some help, she doesn't. She leaves. And she leaves either because she's panicked or because she's still enraged. But I think it was really, I really wished while he had driven it home that she had to have seen him before she departed. And if she drove forward, she had to drive right by him and maybe looking out the passenger side window and seeing him there, not moving. I mean, the question is, how long did she stay there from the point that she hit him until the point that she departed? Was it just a few
couldn't
seconds?
have been long. Yeah. Because she got home at 12:36.
But it would only have taken a few seconds for her to see him.
Yeah,
and
right.
If it was there for even 10 or 15 seconds and she doesn't see him moving,
right.
I mean, that's really got to alert her that he has been seriously incapacitated.
Right.
Now she goes home, or she goes back to Mr. O'Keefe's house, and she claims she went to sleep. I'm sorry, I've never bought that, not once. And we talked about it the other day. If you look at the blood alcohol concentration and the range provided by the chemist, range doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, I've handled hundreds and hundreds of OUI cases with blood alcohol content at issue. That range to me doesn't make any sense. That suggests to me that when she got back to O'Keefe, she started drinking again. Because we know that everybody described the bar as exhibiting no signs of intoxication, yet Jen McCabe and Kerry Roberts both testified that she seemed intoxicated at, what was it, like 5:30, quarter to 6?
Yep.
She had to have been drinking after she returned to O'Keefe's. Now, if you want my theory, and a lot of this is speculation, right?
Right.
Okay. She gets back to O'Keefe's house. She knows the taillight's broken because there's going to be an alert right on the dashboard. She heard felt the collision. She probably saw O'Keefe prostrate on the front lawn. What does she do? When she pulls into the garage, you bet $1 million, she looked at the taillight.
Yeah.
And she knew right then and there something really, really serious had occurred. Does she call 911? No. Does she call any of the people over at the Alberts? Does she try to reach out to Miss McCabe? No. To say, hey, I might have really hurt this guy, or he fell down, or whatever she wanted to tell them. She doesn't say anything. and it appears for at least some period of time she's fairly passive.
She called
And
her
that leaves
parents
you
at 110 too. I don't know if you
Yes.
know that. She called her parents at 110. Yeah.
From the time that she arrives until the time she calls her parents, what, roughly an hour and 20 minutes go by? 20, 30 minutes?
She got home at 5:36, and there's some indication she may not have got out of the car until 5:41. Because in one of the voicemails you hear her, what they say is the sound of her boots on the garage door. I mean, the garage floor. I don't know how they could tell that, but I don't know. So at the very least,
So-
from 5:36 till from 12:36 to 1:10.
Okay. And again, that suggests that she was in the garage.
Yeah.
She could have been in the garage examining the damage to the Lexus.
Yeah.
I
And she deleted the
suspect-
Ring video of her getting home too. So
Correct. So, what was she doing? Was she waiting to be arrested? She
wow.
because
I never thought of that.
because-
Yeah.
But let's go back and let's replay this for a minute. She knows after she strikes him, she's driving home, she knows everybody in the Albert house was waiting for them to arrive.
Right.
In fact, if my memory of Jennifer McCabe's testimony is accurate, and I think Matt McCabe as well, the front door was open
Yes.
and the storm door was closed and it was glass.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
So as she was seated there, there's a pretty good probability that she was aware that they maybe had been looking out, right? And waiting for them. Hey, what's going on? And
and would be soon walking to their cars to leave.
Right.
So I think I think that's a really good point, Kevin, that she might have been sitting there waiting to get arrested. I never thought of that.
So she knew that they were looking for her, for them to arrive. She had to wonder, right? Because she probably didn't know. At the time that she struck O'Keefe, was anybody looking out the window or that door?
Right.
She probably wasn't sure. Okay.
Yeah.
But there was a pretty good chance that somebody was looking out and maybe actually saw her hit him. So that's her thinking, right? Now as she goes back to Mr. O'Keefe's residence, and she's sitting there in the car or doing whatever she's doing, she knew from sitting in front of that house for a few minutes that there was a lot of activity, people coming and going.
Yeah.
It wasn't snowing all that yet, so she had to be aware that someone might spot him.
Yeah.
Now, when you're afraid, like let's say you've done something pretty serious and pretty hurtful to someone else, your chances are your fears are amplified. Your fears of detection are amplified. So I suspect she was sitting at home waiting for the police to come, or she was waiting for somebody from the Albert home to reach out to her and say, "Hey, what happened to John? Well, we saw you strike John. What's wrong?" So she waited there, I'm guessing, for an hour, waiting for the police to come and arrest her.
Yeah.
And nobody contacted. And now she's probably thinking, well, what's going on? Right? Was he not that badly hurt? Did he stagger back into the house? What happened to him? And now I'm guessing, now this part is just pure speculation on my part, but pure speculation. She maybe started to think maybe this isn't that bad. Maybe, maybe he's going to be okay and this is no big deal. But so now she wants to get his attention. So she starts sending those text messages. I'm going to leave your children alone, or your niece and your nephew alone in the middle of a blizzard.
Yeah.
Because she's kind of wondering, why hasn't anybody contacted her? So now she wants to figure out, is he okay? And that's the way she's going to try to elicit a response from him, to check to see if he's okay, or is he really seriously hurt? And then when he doesn't respond and nobody contacts her, okay, and I know she sent this this text message in which she voicemail where she accuses him of being a pervert and cheating on her or whatever it was. I think that was a cover. That was an tell him. Okay, but because she's not gonna leave a voicemail like, John, I know I just hit you with my vehicle. Are you okay? She's not gonna leave that.
Right.
She's not gonna incriminate herself, at least not deliberately. At least until further on when she apparently loses her mind. But that's what I think happened. And then she went out looking for him, and that's when she found him. And she still doesn't call 911. And Lally made that point. I thought that point was so powerful, especially the way he said it.
Yeah.
He had a lot of gravitas when he said it. And if I were on the jury, that really would have resonated with me. She didn't call 911. She called everybody but 911. So that's what I think happened that night. And those are some of the points that perhaps it would have been good to raise with jurors.
I want to build on that, actually, because I never thought of that, the idea that she was sitting there waiting to be arrested, and it makes a lot of sense. And it puts a different possible interpretation of her messages. So for me, the major emphasis in her messages before the last one being at 118, so in that time period that she got home, there's a lot of talk about about John being a pervert that's cheating with someone else. And then later on, when she calls John, when she's from 438, when she seems to have started making calls again, it's kind of changed to John is dead. So, but in light of what you just said, what it could mean is if you're sitting there, you're doom and gloom. You're thinking there's no way out of this. So you're not trying to cover your trail. You're just, fuck you, I'm mad. You're a pervert, John. You're thinking of every insult you can get in before the cops get to come in and arrest you. And so you're calling him a pervert, and you're saying you're cheating, or you're saying this or that. I don't know. It's just a different way of interpreting the other possibility based on the fact that she was sitting there waiting to be arrested. So I don't know. Does that make any conceivable sense? Or
I think that it's always hard to understand the mind of another individual, especially because most of us have not interacted with someone capable of behaving in the manner that she apparently behaved. So it's it's a very confusing picture.
Yeah.
But
it is, no question.
So did
I don't know.
Was there anything that you wanted to discuss this evening that we had either talked about previously, or that some of your viewers would like me and you to discuss?
Yeah, there's been a lot of legal questions that have come up during the last week as the deliberation is going on. So, for example, one of the questions that comes up a lot is, if there is a retrial, do you have any indication of how long that would be? And then if you want to go over also whether there might be any effort to move it to another court, another jurisdiction.
I doubt there's going to be any movement to another court. I don't think the DA's office would want that, and certainly the defense wouldn't want it.
Yeah.
As far as the time frame within which a retrial might occur, I had a jury that hung, and this was a long time ago, and Judge Sobel ordered us to do the trial again in 2 weeks. But I think that was unusual, and that's the only jury I've ever had that was unable to reach a verdict.
Yeah.
So what do I think? I think the defense and the prosecution would like to get the transcripts from the testimonies.
Yeah.
Okay. I would think that the Commonwealth would want to retain an accident reconstructionist.
Yep.
Okay. And so I'm going to guess, and at the same time, Judge Cannoni has been pretty clear that she wants this case resolved. Like when they had that trial date, I think it was originally, what was it, like March 12th, March 16th? I think it was March 12th.
Yeah.
And both sides, excuse me, were kind of desperate for a continuance. She only continued it till what, April 16th?
Right.
Which was a very small amount of time to try to accomplish. I think, and I also think they were waiting for the DNA testing.
They're waiting for the DNA, yeah.
Because she gave them a very, very minor continuance. I'm guessing, therefore, that she'd like to see this case retried sooner rather than later. I'm guessing November, December, maybe January, maybe October. I mean, certainly, I would think October's a possibility too.
Do you recall how long the delay was for the second Chestnut trial? Because that was her court too. It felt like it came quick, but I don't remember.
I don't recall, but here you're talking about a really, really long trial. All those scripts take some time to produce.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to guess that they're going to need at least 3 months. At least.
Right. And what about what's going on now, the next steps? So you've talked about this a little bit with me privately, but the next steps where if the jury sends another note and says, we're stuck.
So then the judge gives what we refer to as the Tui Rodriguez instruction. Mm-hmm. And that is called, some attorneys refer to it as the dynamite instruction. And that instruction, I think you read it on air to your audience recently. I think I sent you the jury instruction.
Yes.
And the message behind that instruction is it almost sounds like we're going to keep you locked up until you reach a decision. Now, if you want my read on Judge Mahoney and how she behaved when the jury reported that it could not reach a verdict.
Yes.
During the course of the trial, and this is very typical of judges, so she's no exception, she was very kind to the jurors. She was always extremely solicitous to them.
Yeah.
That occasion, she was a little bit more curt.
Mm.
And more businesslike.
Mm.
I think the message that some of the jurors might have heard was, come to a decision, and whoever's holding out, knock it off.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've made the point, and I agree with you. Lally was quick to say they have not deliberated long enough. Instantaneous. Mm-hmm. He didn't even give it a moment's thought.
Yeah.
Yannetti, on the other hand, he struck me as almost desperate for this jury to hang.
Yeah.
Now, what does Judge Mahoney know about the jury deliberations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I had a trial years ago, in fact, I just referred to it. So Judge LaBelle asked me, when the jury indicated that it was hung, he asked me if I was willing to accept a less than unanimous verdict. And because I do not like to commit malpractice, I said no. And he was smiling at me, and he never smiled at me. I never smiled at anybody else. So I'm like, that already had me on high alert. Like, what is this guy trying to lure me into?
Yeah.
Okay. After the second trial and the second jury acquitted my client, he was visibly upset. And then I talked, and in the aftermath of the first trial, I was friends with one of the court officers, and the court officer told me, he says to me, Kevin, you might want to think about pleading this guy out. And I said, why is that? He goes, because it was 11-1 in favor of conviction. I'm like, oh, okay. So if the court officer knew that it was 11-1 in favor of conviction, Judge LaBelle knew it was 11-1 in favor of conviction.
Yeah.
So, and here's the thing about the Karen Reed trial. These jurors have been there for what? Is it 9 weeks now?
Yeah.
All they do, and you know this better than I do. All the jurors do is they're in the courtroom or they're back in the deliberating room, and maybe they get to go out for lunch. And for the most part, that's your life as a juror. Now, for these folks, with all these these sidebars and hearings where they're just locked up in the deliberating room, the only people that serve as their conduit to the outside world are the court officers.
Yeah. And it's going to be one in particular. Yep.
One in particular, maybe two. And then these court officers are usually very, very kind to the jurors and try to make this experience as tolerable as possible.
Yeah.
And the court officers are not like police officers, not to denigrate police officers, but court officers are some of the kindest, courteous individuals I've ever encountered. These guys, a lot of these guys are sweethearts.
Yeah.
So, and that's what you want with jurors. You want somebody who's going to be kind to them. So I would guess that, it's possible that a juror might confide in a court officer, the court officer escorting, and particularly in this case, because I've been in the courthouse while this trial has been going on, and there are court officers everywhere. They're guarding every door. So I'm guessing they would never want a juror to go to, like, say, the men's room or the ladies' room unaccompanied. So I'm guessing that there's always going to be a court officer escorting that juror. And that gives the juror and the court officer the time to maybe say a few words. Hi, how you doing?
Certainly does.
And who knows what could be disclosed during that kind of a conversation.
Yep, it's going to be. So if you're David Yannetti, are you, like, when that question came to him from the judge, is he required to really consult on that spot? That's because it's such an important decision with Karen.
When the judge calls you in, or the clerk calls you in, it's usually the clerk, says, okay, this is the message we've received from the jurors. So the clerk is generally speaking going to actually share that with the attorneys before the judge comes up. So I'm assuming that Yannetti and Jackson and Little saw the message and then went and consulted with Karen Reed, and they made their decision as they wanted to approach it.
Now, does some of that decision, though, come after? So, for instance, let's assume that they understand that there's a pretty good chance that the judge has an idea what the temperature of the room is in the jury, if it's close like that, if it is an 11-1 situation. And there's also a fairly good chance that Lowy might know, too. I'm not saying he does. I'm just saying, he's someone that works in the court every day like that, right? So would their decision, the defense team's decision, kind of wait to react to see what Lowy does? So if Lowy says, yes or no, Your Honor, we want them to go back in, that must influence their decision as to what they want, right?
It was my impression, it was just an impression, that Yannetti's statement was completely independent of that of Lowry's. That was my impression.
Okay.
And and I've said this before on your show, like, and you've confirmed this for me. Most jurors are very stoic during the course of a trial, and it's hard to get a read on them. But when you're talking about a trial that lasts, 6, 7, 8 weeks, 9 weeks, and you see these people reacting to witness after witness after witness after witness, and some of this stuff has been incredibly tense, incredibly emotional. Surprised if some of the jurors have maybe exhibited some emotion or some skepticism or some belief, and maybe the attorneys or anybody else watching the trial for the attorneys has picked up on those symptoms or exhibitions of emotion, and they are drawing conclusions about which juror is leaning in which way. So I would suspect if Yannetti was that desperate, because he seemed desperate to be, and I'm not blaming him. I mean, he's got to serve his client, but it would seem to me that they believe that there's maybe just a couple of holdouts. That's kind of like that was the impression. Now, that's pure speculation on my part. I don't have any idea what the numbers are, none. But Lowy, he seemed confident. I mean, he didn't even hesitate. And then you combine that with Judge Cannoni's rather curt instruction, and I get the maybe impression here is that there's a couple of holdouts for the defense, but here's the thing for the defense, and I know people have commented, it's true that usually a retrial benefits the defense. It really does. In most instances, it benefits us, because when I walk into a trial, most of the time I've never seen any of the people before. It's not like a civil case with depositions. I've never seen the people I'm going to cross-examine in most instances. This is the first time I've ever had eyes on them. But now I kind of have a sense of them, and I have a feel for them, and I get transcripts I can study. So that's an enormous advantage for me in the second trial. However, here, you bring in another accident reconstructionist, who does a really good job. You tie things together a little bit, and you get some transcripts on those accident reconstructionists who testified on behalf of the defense, and maybe we find out what's going on with this federal investigation. None of that is good for the defense. None of it.
Yeah. So the other day,
So
Friday.
Trial,
I'm sorry. I thought you were
that was their best. That was their best shot. What about Friday, Kevin?
So Friday, at the end of the day, I went and rewatched what it was like at 4:15. I know you watched very closely the facial expressions of Yannetti and Jackson, and one of the things that I picked up was that independently, Alan Jackson turned around towards what I presume is juror number one, and I don't know what seat is behind juror number one, but it was to the point where he had to turn around like this twice and looked right at that juror, and independently and not at the same time, Karen did exactly the same thing twice. So between the two of them, they looked right at one juror over here, one juror that they were focused on, the juror that they had to turn to see. So there seems to be someone that they have in mind, like, is this the holdout, or is, there was someone that they were focused on there. I don't know if you noticed that or if that.
I did notice it. I'm familiar with. I've tried 2 cases in that courtroom, so I'm very familiar with the configuration of the jury box. So what you would have been looking at if we just identified jurors by seats.
Yeah.
So juror number 1 in the seat closest to the witness, and behind that juror would be juror number 7. So if they were looking to the right, off to the right, they would have been furthermost. You would have been looking at juror number 6 and potentially juror number 12. But there's also someone else they could have been looking at, Kevin.
Okay.
Where the looking is also consistent with normally where the alternates stand.
Okay. So why would you look at the alternates?
I don't know. But I'm just saying that would be where it appeared to me that they were looking would have been potentially consistent with where the alternates would normally be standing. Because they're separated from the rest of the jury.
Right. It's,
so
go ahead.
I'm
sorry.
Go ahead, please.
We know that one of the alternates last week wore pink. Now, I don't know, would this cause extra questioning by the judge, especially given that, without going into it too much, the juror that was dismissed, I forget if it was the beginning of last week. I think it was the beginning of last week. So right as deliberations were starting, is a problem. Was definitely should not have been on the jury, because obviously violated their oath, did not come in with an open mind. Let's just leave it at that. But the judge certainly knows whatever she knows enough that juror never should have been on there. And now you have another juror that has become an alternate, but that she shows up in court crying one day and then the next day wearing pink, which that jury has to go through a sea of pink to get there. So I don't, is it an accident that she wore pink? Of course not. Does the judge question her? Does the judge dismiss her? What do you think? What do you think about that? It seems like that she's a problem, that juror.
Here's what Judge Canoni, above and beyond everything, wants to maintain the integrity of this trial process, especially this deliberative process. She already sees this juror dressed in pink, which is a signal not just to her, but potentially to the other jurors as to how she would vote if she had a vote in this matter. Now, Judge Canoni's not going to do anything that she doesn't have to. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that tomorrow morning one of the jurors calls in sick and can't participate any longer, and they need to have one of the alternates to now join the jury.
Yeah.
Well, at that point, she's probably going to conduct a voir dire of this alternate to determine whether this alternate can actually deliberate fairly.
Right. So she's got her eye on her, basically.
I would imagine that because that there would be a voir dire, which is what we do with jurors who sometimes engage in behaviors that would seem to indicate that they have a bias.
So because of the nature of this trial, the high profile and the mob and all this stuff, and because of there's now a history of jurors being dismissed, is she watching all of the jurors and looking more closely than she normally would?
With regard to Judge Canoni?
Yeah, regards to, right. Is Judge Canoni watching to see if there's bias or more of a reason for questioning the jurors? than she normally would in these cases?
Absolutely. Absolutely, because she knows that members of Free Karen Reed would be deliberately trying to infiltrate the jury
Right.
and lying to her at the sidebar when questioned about their knowledge of the case or any bias they might have, any perceived bias that they might have had. She knows that people have lied to her.
Right.
And so she's scrutinizing that jury because she doesn't want to give, because let's be honest, it was Karen Reed and Aidan Kearney who created this circus-like atmosphere, this movement, and this movement has done everything in its power to undermine the integrity of the proceedings, to intimidate and threaten witnesses. It's unlike anything that I've ever seen. So Judge Cannoni wants a verdict, but she also wants to make sure that the integrity of the process is protected.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing that she's scrutinizing everyone, and then the court officers also serve as her excuse me, her eyes and ears.
Mm-hmm.
So the court officers, with regard to anything that they see or hear, they're going to be reporting back to her.
Mm-hmm.
And the clerk's office is going to be aware. And then outside the courthouse, you have the state police and you have other members of law enforcement. Everybody is aware of every attempt to either intimidate or influence these jurors.
Is there anybody working for the court that monitors social media to see if any of these jurors are participating?
Now, with regard to the court, you have the court officers and you have the clerk's office. There really isn't maybe in the probate courts, they have investigators who investigate families and determine whether or not family is actually capable of raising a child, etc. Where or which parent the child should be placed with. But other than that, with regard to criminal trials, I'm not aware of anybody that she could actually tap. I mean, I suppose she has a judicial law clerk that is working on the case with her. But you also have other judges and other participants in the judicial system that might be keeping an eye on things. What I would guess, though, that the district attorney's office is really scrutinizing everything that's going on with regard to this case outside the courthouse. Any attempts to influence those jurors, I would imagine that the district attorney's office has got at least a few individuals who do nothing but scroll through social media looking for clues that something unfortunate is happening.
Now, a couple of days ago, Aidan Kearney released a very descriptive description of the juries, 1 through 14. Obviously doesn't know their names, but he revealed their age, their race, their gender, and his interpretation of their demeanor. Is this illegal? Would this be something the judge should be able to use to get him out of the court? I'm amazed he's allowed in there, but what do you think?
I'm amazed that Judge Cannoni allowed Kearney into the case and to actually cover the case as a journalist. I'm actually shocked. Mm-hmm. But he did go through the SJC process of becoming certified, and he submitted his application. For whatever reason, the SJC approved it. So perhaps she felt that she didn't really have much of a choice with when you factor in the First Amendment issue. She probably felt she didn't have a choice and had to let him in. Yeah. But excluded him during the testimonies of the witnesses with whom he had been accused or charged with intimidating. As far as what does Aidan Kearney, now you said Aidan Kearney doesn't know the names. My friend, we don't know what he knows.
No, but I mean, he's now published a description of it. Is that legal to publish such a close, he said there's 2 Asians and he's described them by seat.
What I think Kearney is doing, as I think he's putting those witnesses on notice, those jurors on notice that he knows who they are. Now, he didn't reveal their names, but here's the thing, Kevin. Let's go back to, I think it was, what day was it? I think it was like the 28th or something of April. And I was supposed to be starting a civil trial just down the hall from the Karen Reed trial. Mm-hmm. So I'm pulling up probably I wanted to get there early because I figured there might not be any parking. So I probably pulled up around, I don't know, 8:15, and there was still a lot of traffic. And as I'm pulling up, members of Free Karen Reed stepped into the, and I was coming up to a stoplight by the courthouse. I was about maybe, I don't know, 10 cars back. And they came out into the roadway and they started video recording me. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, looking at them like, well, I had I couldn't think of any way that they might know who I was.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I was like, why are you video recording me? And they were just, and it was odd. I mean, the woman was standing right in front of my car, video recording me. And then later on, it occurred to me that the reason she was video recording me is because they're wondering if I'm a juror.
Oh.
And they were taking photographs of my car because they wanted to get my license number.
But the jurors come in by a bus, though, right? So there must be a parking lot where they're meeting and getting brought to the court.
I'm not saying that the Free Karen Reed people are always correct in how they go about it.
Good point.
I can't think of a reason why they thought it was necessary to video record me. It just seemed completely out of the ordinary. I'd never had that happen before, and I couldn't think of any other reason they would bother.
Right.
So, and I don't. And if they were being brought in, if the jurors were being brought in by bus, I would assume they were being brought in by bus. Then maybe my theory is incorrect.
Or this may have been early enough before they understood that they were being brought in by the bus too. If you were there, a month and a half ago or something like that. So, but like you said, they just didn't understand it. But they may know who you are. They know who we are over here. So you've been on my show before.
I appeared on your show at that point.
Okay.
So
all right.
Again, I can only speculate as to why they thought it was worthwhile to video record me.
Right. So, so if somebody sent what Turtle Boy published, if somebody sent what Turtle Boy published a couple of days ago to Judge Canoni, could she dismiss? Would that be enough of a basis? What he revealed about the jurors to boot him from court?
I would think that would be more than sufficient, because again, I think he's telling to these jurors that he knows who they are. That's what I really think he's up to, because otherwise, what would be the point of these descriptions? But he's got them by number and he's got them by physical appearance. I believe that that's a message to the jurors.
Right.
And they have to wonder. Here's the thing. The jurors are leaving each day by bus, right? You don't think that the Karen Reed people have figured out where that bus goes?
I would assume, yep.
So it's got to go to a parking lot somewhere, right?
I mean, we even had in the Kyle Rittenhouse jury, I forget what state that was. Oh, was that in Minnesota or something? But NBC followed the juror bus by car back to the parking lot and got caught doing it. So I mean, it's so if they can do it, definitely the Turtle people will do it. And
then what would prevent Free Karen Reed people from following the jurors home?
Yeah,
really. I mean, there really wasn't ever a great way of protecting the identity of the jurors. I think they've done as much as they possibly could, but at a certain point, they have to be allowed to go home.
Right.
And maybe and I don't know what's happening. Maybe they're having the state police tail the jurors home, but if they did that, they're drawing more attention to the jurors. So I mean, how do you solve this issue?
Yeah. Jules has a question. Is it possible the jury reached a decision on Friday, but wanted to hold out till Monday to give Reed the weekend with her family?
I think it's possible that they reached a verdict. I think it's at least possible that there's been some movement, because why wouldn't you just come back at noon on Friday and say we can't reach a verdict and try to expedite their escape?
And they had the perfect reason at 3:30 when the judge said, "Are you ready to go home?" And they said, "No, we want to keep going now till 4:15." So that gives the sense that something was going on. Something was moving.
That suggests that there's at least some hope that they might be able to resolve the case. But that hope, I don't think me personally, I don't think it's going to be a not guilty. I don't foresee that, because
Right.
there's simply no argument. There's no evidence that a not guilty juror, jury in favor of voting not guilty, there's no evidence that juror could point to convince a juror who believed her to be Karen Reed to be guilty. There's no evidence that juror could point to.
Right.
All the evidence overwhelming points at Karen Reed. And there's one other point that I want to make, Kevin. Police plant evidence. I've had it in my cases.
Mhm.
Okay. My father was a Boston police officer. One of the first stories he ever told me, I said, I told him I wanted to be a police officer. I'm like 10, right? So I told him I wanted to be a police officer like him. And I looked up to the police officers, and he said, "Let me tell you something, Kevin." I said, "What's that?" He goes, "Well, let me tell you a story. We brought this guy in. This guy was arrested, and he was only charged with disorderly person." I said, "Okay." And they searched him on, and when they arrested him, and they searched him before they put him in the cruiser, and they bring him to the station, and he's screaming at us and yelling at us and calling us names. And then one of the police officers came out with a big bag of cocaine and goes, "Look what I just found on him." And so that's my father telling me that the police are capable of planting evidence and not to
Right.
trust them. And that was
Right.
from a Boston police for 22 years. I've had instances again where the police lie, where the police plant evidence, where the prosecutors are dirty. It's not like I come into this case with a perspective that the police and the prosecutors are always to be trusted. I don't have that
Right.
perspective.
Right.
The reason I have the perspective that I do is there was no opportunity
Yep.
for the police to break the taillight, transport the pieces to the scene, and plant them. It has to be plausible. There's nothing about this conspiracy theory that's plausible. So I don't come into as somebody who doesn't have a healthy skepticism of law enforcement or the prosecution. The other thing about Lally, from what I've heard, and I've never had a case with him, from everything that I've heard, he's a really good guy. Like, he's a solid guy. That's what I hear.
Everything I've heard from other prosecutors that work with him and stuff is people that both think he's good or bad at what he does, but they all say the same thing. This guy's uncorruptible.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way that this guy would do that. That this guy would ever be involved in any kind of corruption. I have never heard anybody say anything. I mean, he seems to be the total gold standard for that kind of, the kind of civil servant you want that just cares about justice. And I'm myself, even though I have been critical of Lally, if this is tried again, he's the guy I would want to do it. He's totally the guy I'd want to do it. I think he'd learn, like you've said. I think he would learn from his mistakes.
Again, and I posted this on Twitter, I don't think it was yesterday. When you consider how much stress he's been under, the hate message. I mean, I heard from a member of the clerk's office. The clerk's office is inundated with calls from Free Karen Reed people screaming about this and that. And the staff there is like, oh my God. You got to imagine that the DA's office is getting the same kind of hate calls.
Yeah.
Emails and whatever else. And, Lally's going to go home at some point, or to his wife and kid, or to or his family, or whatever he does. I mean, this has got to be nonstop stress.
Yeah.
And the fact he could make it from the beginning of the trial through the closing and not collapse is it's an enormous achievement. And this guy deserves incredible amount of credit. I mean, he was just a warrior. I have nothing but the highest regard for him. I think he's been, throughout the trial, I think he's been a class act.
Yeah. He's had to master all this forensic data. He's had to master medical issues and vehicle data and the testimony of every witness. So he questioned or cross-examined every one of those witnesses. So yeah, just an enormous workload that he had to shoulder here. So, and I think there are times that he shines. So where I've criticized him is I think sometimes he's lost the forest through the trees, but I don't think that'll happen in the second case at all. If there's a second case, it's going to be very different. I think it's going to be powerful case. And especially if they do bring in an accident reconstructionist, but even if they don't, I believe that mistakes that the DA's office made was not giving Trooper Paul access to John's phone data. Let him have that data. Let him make that connection for the jury. That's crucial. And obviously, Trooper Paul was nervous, had never testified in a big case like this. Trooper Paul's going to do 100 times better next time, 1,000 times if he is given access to that data.
I'm sorry, Kevin. I disagree. I think Trooper Paul, God love him, he was in an incredibly difficult position, but he has to be replaced.
We can't be, because he's the one that compiled those reports, right? So
be replaced.
I thought because he's someone that actually did the initial reporting and on the scene and documented the locations of the pieces to establish the spray pattern of the taillight.
But an accident reconstructionist, from the available evidence, should be able to do a better reconstruction than Trooper Paul did. Now, is it going to be, would it have been better if the accident reconstructionist was involved in the case right from the beginning? Yes. But accident reconstructionists, sometimes we don't hire them for months, sometimes years after the accident. So accident reconstructionists are accustomed to piecing together the collision from evidence that, and sometimes, oftentimes from a scene that they've actually never visited.
So there's not a legal requirement to use Trooper Paul because he compiled the original reports and the data and collected all that? There's not.
And the defense certainly can call him if they want.
Okay. So that's their option. Yeah. Okay. That's
But
why I'm not a lawyer.
I can't think of any obligation that the Commonwealth has to use a witness that maybe didn't do such a great job. Right. I mean, because the goal here of the judicial system is to get the correct result, right?
Right.
And
right. I just know that my understanding was if somebody is the one that, like for instance, Trooper Garino is the one that made the losing what it's called when you take down the extraction of the phone. So he would be required to testify to say, I made the extraction of John's phone. Am I wrong on that? Or
I think what would be important to an expert, an expert is not like a typical witness. So you can't have one witness come in who was you can't have an eyewitness and then substitute somebody else, correct? A lay witness. But when it comes to an expert is allowed to rely on the work of other experts and the data that is collected. The expert doesn't necessarily be the person who collected that data.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. That's good to know. Wow. That does give them a lot more power here to come up with a better case. Absolutely. It'll be expensive, but
I think that it's a worthwhile investment.
Yes, much cheaper than a third trial.
Then it would be interesting to see if the defense would go back to the dog bite scenario and the 2:27 a.m. telephone call. And then, look, can I make one point just before we conclude?
Mm-hmm.
I was astounded that Jackson referred to the 2:27 a.m. Google search. I thought that the expert, and I don't recall his name, that testified on behalf of the defense.
Ian Whiffen. I'm sorry, defense, Rich Green. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, he wasn't in the same class.
Yeah.
Whiffen and was it Jessica
Hyde, and then Ian Whiffen from Celebrate. Yeah.
I mean, they were just absolutely class A expert witnesses, and Mr. Green was maybe class B or C. I mean, he wasn't even in their league. I was shocked that Jackson hadn't abandoned that, but again, they seem to be they seem to have determined their path and let nothing stand in their way. So maybe it wasn't all that surprising.
Just one last question then. Is there sometimes, so in the writing world, there's an expression, kill your demons. And basically what it means is you're writing your novel or sometimes your screenplay, and you have a character or a scene or some bit of writing, a page that you're just so in love with, but it doesn't fit the story. And you're really better off getting rid of that thing, And sometimes it takes a really good editor to get you to say, no, listen, I know you love that, but you got to get rid of it. Is there something like that that goes on with lawyers? I look at Alan Jackson, and I think a lot of what he said in that closing argument, he might have been better off not saying, even though he was very good at saying it. So it became very hard for him to resist wanting to grandstand up there, but maybe a simpler challenge to the state's position, whether they had fully established, the physical injuries and stuff like that. Did he go? Is it hard for lawyers to resist that temptation sometimes when you have, especially when you have that kind of skill?
Yes, it's hard to resist. So when I'm sitting there and I'm preparing for a trial, like I think I have a lot of ideas, and then as the trial gets closer and closer, I try to identify the ideas that maybe are not that great and maybe unworkable. And then what I always do, I know that some people think trial attorneys were experts and jurors were not. Okay. So what I do is I have a collection of friends that I will explain the case to that individual, those friends, and then have them give me feedback on how I'm going to approach it. So that's my reality check. I have friends I trust that will give me good feedback, and then I can make better decisions as to how I want to proceed. It doesn't appear that Yannetti and Jackson engaged in any reality testing, but hey, at this point they have a hung jury, and considering the evidence that they were up against, okay, it's an achievement.
Right.
I'll say that. I'll give them that, because they shouldn't even have been in this game.
Thank you, Kevin. And just real quick, Kitty has a question. They can submit new evidence in a new trial, right? If
Correct.
There's new evidence is discovered. Yes. Okay. All right. I figured that was the case, but I just wanted to make sure. Well, thank you very much, Kevin, for being here. It was fun as always. I know you have a rather large puppy that needs attention.
I heard her rattling around in her cage a little while ago, so I better go see her. But thank you again, Kevin. Always a pleasure to appear on your show, and I thought your guests were terrific, Mr. Depetro, that I pronounced, and Miss Vargas. I thought Miss Vargas was terrific.
It was really nice to meet her, and I hope to have her back. And obviously, John will definitely be back.
Perfect. All right,
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks a lot.
I'll talk to you during the week.
Thanks.
All right, guys. So I'll sorry to some of the questions came in late. I tried to get to them, but as I had already kept Kevin a little longer than his dog. His dog is a 70-pound Rottweiler who is at that attention-needing stage. So we'll bring on. So Mandy Strong says the viewership will go way up if we start covering Sarah Boone. It's quite the conversation piece. All right, let me write that down then. I don't even know the case. I actually, so I'm not a huge true crime connoisseur. And when I do take on a case, I'm kind of like when Tuesday Gazette was on here a couple of weeks ago. She said her preference is to kind of really, once she finds a case that she's interested in, to really dig hard into that case for a while until she has all the evidence and is really. So I can kind of be like that way myself. I also like cases that are unsolved, so you have a kind of puzzle to kind of figure out. So I don't know if that Sarah Boone case is like that, so we'll look into that. I'll be doing more shows with Dave McGrath. Dave is someone who is more like an encyclopedia of true crime cases, so I'm sure he probably knows about Sarah Boone. Rena has a question too. Let's go further back. So Rena says, why didn't Karen shed a tear? Who can say what triggers tears with people, but she definitely has had a lot of strange coldness at the wrong times, smiling and laughing at the wrong times. There's no way that a jury is going to miss that. We're only seeing a portion of it because most of the time the camera is on the witness. But what the defendant is doing in court is going to be seen all times by the jury. And they're evaluating her. What kind of person is this? What kind of human being is this? They're not missing it. Kitty, I did get your question in. Frank says that Karen had to know that she hit him. If not, why would she first jump to he is dead? Well, she didn't actually. She didn't jump to that until 5:00. But so to me, that was that transition. But Kevin raised a really good possibility that Karen got home and was assuming the police were coming any moment. But after a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour, it was at that point that she realized, well, the police aren't coming, so maybe I can go to plan B. Or maybe she even felt, maybe that's when she started drinking again. Kevin thinks that she might have started drinking again. So if that's, there is a range of possibilities here. You always have to be, to me, I would think, you don't want to try to argue things to a jury in closing arguments that you're not sure of or open to other interpretations if you already have bulletproof evidence. Stick to the stuff that's indisputable. That's in my view, but I've never tried a case. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know shit. Sarah Smile says, thank you, Kevin. Keep up the great word for speaking the truth. Yes. And just as I always say, it's not that I know the truth. It's just I will always tell the truth as I see it, which means if I make a mistake, if better evidence comes out, I'll correct it. I'm always honest. There's a difference between truth and honest. I may not always tell you the truth. I'm always honest. So what I tell you is what I believe to be the truth. And so I had Young Jelly himself reached out to me privately. I don't want to go into, I don't like to be this is what the turtle crowd does, is repost your messages. So I won't do that. But he's saying that the feds are coming after me, that he's seen the evidence that there are illegal folders that I have that I got from the state police. These guys are nuts. Folders? What would be in these illegal folders? I've never been sent a folder. I've never been sent an illegal document. The only documents that I have are court documents that were filed. So motions, replies to motions. That's it. I've never had anything. The closest thing I even actually had to a document that was in discovery was something from last summer that was circulated from Turtle Boy. He sent a single page of Jessica Hyde's report on the forensic data from the phone, so on the 227 search. And my reaction was, where's the rest of the homework here? If your kid comes home from school and shows you the report card, and in all that's in that report card is the grades from math and English, but the grades from science and phys ed are missing, and math and English has B's, but the other grades are missing, you're going to say, where's the rest of it? Where's the rest of it, son, daughter? Did you lose that on the way home? Why? So that's what I thought when I saw what they put out. It was like page 3 of the Jessica Hyde report, and that's it. And all that it said in that was it listed how the 227 search was undetermined. Now, she later explained that was not her conclusion. That was what the software produced, and she later explained it was not at all undetermined in her opinion. So, but I knew last year when I saw that was suspicious. That's the only thing I've ever had, and I didn't get it from any state trooper. I've never talked to any state troopers. I don't have any folders or documents. So Young Jelly he's delusional. And I believe it was Sean actually that was reporting that. Sean said a few days ago, I know for a fact that Kevin has illegal information and I've reported him to the DOJ, he said. It's nuts. I don't have anything. They can come and search my records or my devices anytime. I don't have anything. In fact, somebody recently asked me today, as a matter of fact, if I had copies of Natalie's texts, which were basically, she was the go-between the messages from Turtle Boy to Karen. So back a year ago in April and May, before Karen started communicating through the encryption app called Signal directly with Turtle Boy, before that she used a go-between because they knew what they were doing was wrong. So she used the go-between, and she used her friend Natalie. And Natalie's now become a friend of mine. And so this past fall, when I was talking to Natalie, when I wanted to know something about those texts, she was always willing to share them with me. But she says, I'll copy it and paste it. I said, no, I don't want that. I don't want, because I don't know where these things are going to end up, and I don't want them on my computer. So I just said, read it to me. So what we did was we'd go over, I would tell her to search. For instance, my main interest was the feds. What was going on between the feds? So she would search feds or federal or Josh Levy or U.S. attorney. She did all those relevant searches that I asked her to do. And then she would read them to me over the phone. And I didn't even write notes. I did have to have her go back and have her do it again in case I missed something. So Natalie was very patient with me and went over this stuff. And then there were other times when I maybe had different questions that I asked her, but she never once sent me any of those. And she would have, but I didn't want them. I don't want anything, and sure enough, not long later, those messages did end up in discovery. So I was glad I didn't have them on my computer. Not that it wouldn't have been illegal at that time, because I would have got them before they were in discovery, but just better off not having that stuff. So that's, so to the extent that I've investigated this with things like that, it tends to be just phone conversations. So there are no folders. There are no documents. There's nothing for the DOJ to investigate. But I'll also say, even in terms of information that was sent by voice, none of it was discovery material. I wouldn't have wanted that. And the people that I talked to have the same kind of ethics, that if they knew that, they wouldn't share it. And they didn't want to know it either. So no, it was never anything like that. So the fantasies that these guys have are unbelievable. He's even described it as though I work for the troopers. I have not had a single discussion with any trooper except a 5-minute call to Lieutenant Tully, who I'm sure had no idea who I was, regarding threats that I was getting. And I had been getting the threats. I didn't care about them. The only reason I even called him was because then I started learning there were certain women who were also getting these threats. And I said, I don't expect you to do anything about it, Lieutenant. I just want you to document this in case something happens, or in case there's a problem with one of these women, where they can say, okay, he's also getting those threats. So then you can, if there's some kind of charges brought up, they can talk to me. That was it. We didn't talk about the Karen Reed case at all. I'm sure he knew that it was in regards to that. I told him I was a YouTuber. Whether he knew who I was, he probably didn't care. So, and that's how it should be. So this idea that I'm somehow this secret agent of the Mass State Police is just delusion. It's just delusion. The delusion of these people who still think the feds are coming in any day to arrest all the McAlberts. It's nuts. It's insane. Don't succumb to it. So, Taryn, this would be a question directed towards Kevin Mahoney, obviously, but can you please comment on the role of fear of the jurors and the threats by Turtle Boy regarding juror number 7? I don't remember seeing the specific threats, so maybe you can refresh my memory, but it's a real thing. I don't understand why. To me, I've heard criticism of the judge. I think she's conducted a good, fair trial, very intelligent. It does at times seem like she's favoring the defense, but that's not actually the case. It's natural in any trial to favor the defense, because if the state loses because of double jeopardy, that's it. Karen can't be tried again. So it's not like it's not like if the jury votes to acquit, the state can appeal that. No. So no appeals come from the state. The appeals come from the defense. So if Karen is convicted, you'll pretty much automatically get appeals from the defense. So the judge is, in any case, is trying to avoid reversal. And so she's going to favor the defense as much as possible. And there's also an argument to be made, since that person is on trial for murder, that makes sense too. If you have to give somebody a little more leeway, you want to give it to the defense. And I do think the judge has done that. She struggled with how far to go. And Jackson is an effective, experienced lawyer that knows how much to push a little more. And he's done that over the last year. But I think the judge is a good judge and has done a good job. The only decision that I disagree with is to let Turtle Boy in the court. You have to have control of your court. You have to understand the sacredness of protecting the jurors. And I know that she understands that, but in this case, she didn't. And she should have understood that this guy had already threatened the jurors. She was told this. She was told it by Adam Lally, and probably privately too. She knows what he did with the juror that caused the hung jury on the first Chestnut trial. That was her trial, and he outed that juror. And he made clear that he would do that to any jurors on this trial. So it's really unforgivable. And I don't that she let this go on here and didn't really. And sure enough, he's doing exactly what he said he would, trying to intimidate the jurors. But I do believe that at the end of the day, I myself don't believe that a juror will vote to acquit because of fear. I do not believe that. I don't believe if there is a juror that votes to acquit, and I can't imagine there's more than one or two. The evidence is just too powerful. But if there is one, I don't believe it'll be due to fear. I believe it'll be due to opportunity. It'll be due to that juror wanting to be a hero to this pink-shirted mob. That's what I believe. And fortunately, recently a juror was dismissed that was the case. She's gone. However, we can't know that there might not be one more on that jury. It's a scary thought, because that juror is betraying all the other jurors because she's not actually weighing evidence or deliberating. She came into the trial and hid her predisposition from the court. So if there's a juror in there that came in with a preconceived notion that is a turtle rider that hid that, as the other one did, and hid it almost to the end, that juror is betraying the other people that she has spent the last 9 weeks with. So I hope that's not the case. So if there's a juror listening right now who is a lone holdout, you better be able to make a sound argument to those other 11 jurors why you believe what you do and why you won't budge on it. Because if your true motive for doing that is only because you're a turtle rider, then you're betraying those 11 people. And this is the greatest moment of your life, more than likely, where you're on a trial like this, of this nature, a murder trial, and you form a bond with those other 11 jurors that you've had lunch and coffee with, and you weren't allowed to talk about the case, so you talked about your children and your jobs and growing up or whatever. You form that bond with them. You're tight with these people. If you hid from them the fact that you are a turtle rider, one of the lowest forms of creature in this state, but you hid that from them, you're betraying them. So you owe it to them to weigh evidence. Now, if it's a juror that is not a turtle rider, but is just in her or his conscience just is not accept the evidence, that's different. But you better be able to make a strong argument to those other 11 jurors. Why is it that those 11 people believe something that you don't? Why is it those 11 people have the courage to stand up to that mob and you don't? So you owe it to them. You owe it to yourself to do the right thing. You owe it to yourself to weigh evidence logically. And the evidence here is bulletproof. And it's not just about anymore justice for John O'Keefe. That is the important, that we never want to lose sight that a good man was lost here. And of course, it's also about justice for his family, but it's not just about that. And of course, there's the larger issue now, too, of all of the innocent witnesses who are now being tagged as part of a murder conspiracy. That is, unfortunately, a huge part of this case. And an acquittal, especially if it's an unjust acquittal, leaves them under that burden for the rest of their lives. But even that's not the whole story. There is one other more subtle but important truth here. This is about the triumph of evidence and reason over emotion and mob rule. Inside that court, I think you have hopefully at least 10 or 11 jurors who have struggled with this, knowing what's going on outside, but have weighed the evidence and they understand that Karen is guilty. But they're all forced to face that gauntlet when they come in. And then there may be one or two jurors that are holding out for false reasons in order to appease a vicious mob. Now, people have tried to suggest. Now, Vinny on Court TV the other night had a kind of talking to moment with me and Nick. Now, me and Nick don't generally fight on the show either. We've been respectful to each other. But Vinny was basically saying, yeah, people ought to be able to have different opinions on things and then still not make it personal. And I do generally agree with that. And I don't feel any personal animosity towards Nick at all. In fact, on the other night on the show, I thanked him for the moment of silence that he held with the protesters for John O'Keefe. He did that Friday outside of court. I thought that was a class move. I thought it was sincere on his part, and I believed it. So I thanked him for it. But the idea that both these mobs are the same, that there's a mob on one side that's all one way and it's vicious, and there's a mob on the other side that's equally vicious. No, that's a false portrayal of events. Sure, there might be somebody nasty on the side of the prosecution that uses some of the same tactics. Okay, of course. It's not a perfect separation, but this mob on the Turtle side their tactics predate this case. They've been developed over years. And they're built around the idea of a social media mob. Social media terrorism. The idea that you can control other people by scaring them into submission through the threat of social media smear. I don't think Turtle Boy initially began knowing that was the key to power. I'm sure he didn't. He learned it over time, and he's a guy that is unguided by any ethical instinct at all. He's unguided by any feeling of empathy. He's incapable. His brain is not capable. He just wasn't born right in the head. But he's smart. He's clever. And he's learned over time. It's not genius stuff. It's pretty easy. But he's learned over time that through the threat of social media smearing, you can build power. You can build a mob. And once your mob gets to a certain size, it starts to take on a kind of momentum of its own. When people know there's some guy that's got 10,000 people watching, they want to be a hero to that mob. They want to provide information for it, even if it's a smear, even if it's fiction. And on the other hand, other people are terrified of it, so they don't want to take on that mob in any way at all. I understand that. They have families, they have jobs, they have many people are good people, but have one embarrassing thing that happened earlier in their life, and they don't want it exposed. It's understandable. Turtle understands it. So there's no false, the idea of equivalence here is false. What this mob does, what people like Jen Altman do. Jen Altman is a capo in this mob. She's an errand girl. She's like the nurse for Jim Jones that was stirring the Kool-Aid that ordered the cyanide. And those people didn't say Jim Jones. I've studied the Jim Jones, the People's Church, and when they went down to Guyana, those people that were in his inner circle, they were all women, just like Jen Altman. They knew that Jim Jones was a flawed man. They didn't think he was the Messiah. They didn't agree with everything he did or said. They knew he was fallible. There might have been people further within the cult that thought he was a Messiah, but the people that were in his inner circle saw his flaws. But at the end of the day, they followed his orders. They ordered the cyanide. They measured it. They mixed it in the Kool-Aid. They stirred it. And they got the kids in line and made sure they drank it. Now, I'm not suggesting that'll end up like that here. It won't. But you have people like Jen Altman that do the same thing. They understand the turtle tactics of smear. I have the text to see it. I have the text to prove it. She does it to me all the time. And everything she tries to throw out there is fake. I just kind of laugh it off, even though people might believe it because they want to. But she puts out fake stuff. She was putting one out today, too. It's got no connection to me. In fact, it's connected to a bar that I went into once, had no connection to. It was a bar that had become popular in Worcester in the 90s called Walshy's on Main Street. I had no connection to anything there. The staff, the owner, nothing. I didn't even hang out downtown. But that's how that cult operates. And we're counting on these jurors to resist that. Hate to put that pressure on them. But the stakes are higher. This mob that hangs out, many of those people that hang out in front of the court are not bad people. They're not unintelligent. But people surrender the ability to think rationally when they join a mob. That's what mobs are famous for. That's what they're famous for. Ordinary people become dangerous within a mob. They do things they would not normally do, and they no longer can think for themselves. They no longer can reason. So Mandy, thank you. Mandy said, why didn't Karen ask Jen? Is this a new spelling of Jen? Everybody always spells it with two N's now. Is that always spelled with two N's? I always thought it was one N. Anyways, why didn't Karen ask Jen, where is John? Have you upset John? Because Karen Reed knew John never made it inside the house. So, it doesn't seem that Karen had the number for any of the relevant people. She didn't know the Alberts. She obviously knew them a little bit. She had seen them at the bar and felt comfortable enough asking Chris to open the pizza shop. But to my knowledge, she did not have the phone number of anybody inside that house. And of course, Chris Albert wasn't at that house anyway. So if she had Chris's number, that might not have mattered anyways. Although she could have called Chris to see if, got their number, but she didn't have Brian Albert's number. She didn't have Nicole Albert's number. She also didn't have Jen McCabe's number. So that's why in the morning, a few hours later, she had to go in and have the niece. I don't remember if she used the niece's phone to call or actually just got the number. I think she might have used the niece's phone to call, but I'm not sure about that. In any case, so who could she have called to find out where John was? I don't know. but no evidence has emerged to show. So Mandy is correct that at least no evidence has emerged to show that she made any effort to find out where John was. So, but it's a little, again, this is why I wouldn't include that in the closing, just because it's not certain. It's reasonable for us to talk about it and say, So I think it's very reasonable it's a good point that Mandy brings up. And, but compared to what the state could have focused on in the trial, we don't know, unless they had got, see, the thing is too, is they have Karen's phone, but they didn't reveal very much about what calls were on it inside the trial. So I presume that they gave that call list to the jury. I wish Kevin was back. I could ask him that. Kevin, if by some chance you're coming back from walking your dog, if you hear this, email me the answer to this question. Did the state turn over Karen's complete call log, at least from a certain time period, so that day, to the jury? Because we know that Karen called other people. We were told that she called other people, John's friends and stuff like that. I don't know, but I don't know. It wasn't discussed in the trial. So does the jury have access to that? Can they look at that phone log? So, so Kevin's probably not listening right now, so I'll have to message him with that. I don't know what you guys think on that. Where else can you follow Kevin? I know, on Twitter. He posts on Twitter here and there, but that's, I would say, pretty much just Twitter and here. He's been asked he went on Court TV once the same day I was there in Dedham, but I don't think he's generally had much interest in that. So there's other times they've asked him and he hasn't gone on. So he's not generally a law tuber. He's not someone that's doing a lot of shows. So pretty much you're stuck seeing him here with me. I mean, I think you may see more law shows come out of this case. And so there are good ones and bad ones. Some of the better ones, hopefully you'll see Kevin on. I can tell you, well, I don't know if I should report this, but Joe Krowski is going to, I think, start his own channel to discuss cases. So I look forward to that. Joe is one of the great storytellers. And so it would be really cool if Joe had Kevin on his channel. And I would guess that Kevin would do that. So, because those two, it would be great to listen to the two of them talk together, especially about this case, but about any case, and because they both have such a long experience as defense attorneys. I mean, every time you talk to Kevin, there's a great new story that comes out. So, just checking through chat, see if there's anything I need to address. Been on since 6, so it's probably time to call it a night before you guys want to kill me. Plus, we will be back on in the morning again for the trial. We'll be on. I think there's a good chance we're going to get a verdict tomorrow. Oh, actually, yes, Joe is right now. I talked to him today. He's on a cruise with his wife, but when he's back, he's going to be on the show. So Joe will definitely be on the show. And for those of us who have been rational and focus on evidence, we're all going to get together sometime in the middle of the summer and have a dinner. So people, it'd be great to put a face to the names that we see in chat, which usually aren't even real names, right? So it'll be great to be able to meet some of you guys in purpose. You get in person. You get to meet Tom Fleming, and it's not a big deal meeting me because you see me on the screen all the time, but you get to meet somebody that you only see in a more indirect way in chat. You get to meet Tom in person, and it's worth it. It's worth it. Trust me, you'll enjoy it. So let me just check these messages coming in, see if there was anything worth interesting of you guys. I get these messages sometimes, but they aren't always something I can share. Oh, good. Somebody sent me, I won't say their name because I never know who wants to have their name read out, but sent me some information about this Sarah Boone. She's the one who locked her boyfriend in a suitcase and went to bed. Was he alive in the suitcase? It's wild. I don't know if you would be covering it. So did she lock her boyfriend alive in a suitcase? That must be a pretty big suitcase. Either that or the boyfriend was the size of Young Jelly. Young Jelly could probably fit in a suitcase. Oh, they were playing hide and seek? They're adults, though, right? I don't know. Weird stuff. So he died accidentally, correct? It wasn't a murder. Well, I mean, it's well, yeah. What is she charged with? So is she charged with manslaughter? Because obviously it was a game they were playing that went wrong. It sounds like she didn't let him out, so he tried to get out and she didn't. So did she intend to kill him? I guess is the question. I'm reading chat, obviously, and messages. Well, I can't watch the video now, obviously. I'm on the show, so I'll watch it after, but I'm just trying to see what we can answer now. She was a nutter. I'll tell you. Oh, no, I shouldn't say. I don't never know what I should say in the air, but the only phobia I have is claustrophobia. So with my medical condition, that can be a handicap. I really can't do MRIs. I don't even like it runs in my family. In my case, whatever gene is in there wasn't triggered until I was about 40. And before that was not there at all. But it just affects me where I can't, if we go to a dinner, I can't sit inside the booth and be trapped. I have to sit on the outside of the booth. Or if I'm on a plane, when I was younger and I flew on a plane, I loved the window seat so I could look out. I still would love to be able to look out, but I can't sit in the window seat unless the other two seats are empty. A few years back, I flew to Detroit to pick up a dog, and I wasn't able to change my seat on the return trip. And I was like, I'm carrying this dog, and I'm like, can I suck it up? I had a window seat. I was like, can I suck this up and get through it? I'm like, so you're walking towards the end of the plane. And I'm thinking, I know it's going to be some really fat person sitting next to me. I'm not fat shaming anybody. I'm just saying that if you don't want to be trapped, like having a very large person next to you can do that. I'm not fat, but I'm also big sized guy. So you'd be like this, you know? So I'm like walking up this plane and I'm like, oh, please don't be some big person. Don't be some big person. When I finally get to my seat, it was not a big person, but what it was a young couple, and the young mother had a child that she was breastfeeding and holding. No, actually, I'm you know what? No, I don't think she was breastfeeding. It was maybe the child was about 1.5 or 2 years old or something. I don't know. It was enough where she was sitting. The child was a boy, actually. Now I think about it, was a boy was sitting in the mom's lap. So I'm on the window seat with a dog, good sized dog crate. The dog was it was a pretty good sized puppy, like 10 or 11 pounds, sitting. That's between my legs. To my left is the mother, and she's got a kid that's like kicking me. And then is the father. And I'm sitting here like this, and I'm like, oh, I'm trying to go through like meditation games because it's the idea of being trapped. I have no fear of flying at all. It's just the idea of being trapped. And then I get a message from someone on the phone saying, oh, what's going on? And I'm like, what do you mean what's going on? She's like, your flight's been delayed. I'm like, it has? And then the pilot gets on about 30 seconds later to say there was fog in Boston, so we're going to have to delay the flight indefinitely. You got to sit here and wait until the fog clears. I'm like, you've got to be kidding. Now, instead of trying to suck it up for an hour and a half, I'm sucking it up indefinitely. So I'm just sitting here like this. I'm like, I don't think I can get through this. And I must have looked so white in the face that the family, the young couple next to me, they actually, maybe because of me or maybe because of just for themselves, but they called over the stewardess and they said, there's 5 living beings now, counting the dog, inside these 3 seats. Can you maybe do something else for it? Because the plane was full. But they have these planes keep an empty set of seats in the back, I think, for pilots to fly and stuff. So they said, no, sure, we'll take you to this. We'll take you up back. So I went from being stuck in this seat with all these people to now I have a whole row myself. And the plane hasn't even taken off yet, you know? And so I'm like, no, this is great. But young woman, probably like 30, was sitting behind me. And she goes, excuse me, do you mind if I sit up front with you since we all can have more space? And she was a pretty woman too. So I didn't mind, but I was like, no problem, but I'm taking the aisle seat. So she got next to the window and I had the aisle seat and I put the puppy crate in the middle. As soon as the flight took off, I got a gin and tonic and I didn't care if that thing was up in the air for 6 hours because I had an aisle seat. So I didn't care. But so being stuck in a suitcase, well, I never would have got in the suitcase to begin with. But yeah, that's not the way I want to go. Not the way I want to go at all. So we'll check in for one more question and then I'll call it a night. I got to go have a little bit of ice cream and then get ready for tomorrow. I do think there will be a decision tomorrow, but we have no way of knowing. If there's no, let's put it this way. If there's no verdict tomorrow, doesn't that make it seem like there's probably going to be a hung jury? So I don't know, not necessarily. In the Chesna trial, in the Chesna retrial, so the second trial, again, the jury kept sending back to Judge Cannoni the message that we're deadlocked. And eventually they, sorry, I'm just checking out the message. She kept forcing him to go back and deliberate, and eventually they reached a decision, and it was guilty. So Seichner says, so Kevin likes the pretty girl, but Karen couldn't seduce me. Well, I can tell you this too. I owned a bar, was in the bar life for many, many years. If you don't learn to, what's the best way to put this? You have to resist certain opportunities because there are some people that are just going to lead you to more headaches than it's worth, no matter how pretty they are. That's one of the early lessons you have to learn in the bar life. So there's a lot of lessons you learn in the bar life. Coffee ice cream is one of my favorites, but I like pretty much all ice cream. I would say coffee's in my top 3. In particular, the one I have now is French vanilla. Thomas Fleming says, ignore the skanks. Ooh, I don't know. I don't want to say skank. Can I get, Tom, you just tricked me. I'm gonna get a strike for saying skank. I don't know if you can say skank. No, and it's not even skanks really. It's not like that actually. Obviously that's part of it, but sometimes. But there are other types of just people that you meet in the bar that might be intelligent, beautiful, and in most ways good people to know, people that you don't mind talking to, but you sense other red flags that they might be a problem. So, and I would definitely say that just based on Karen's behavior with the text to John from the 28th, I don't want to judge her just by that one day, but those were the kind of red flags that you'd look for. somebody like that. Vanilla Bean is great too, Nicole. But yeah, those are the kind of red flags. Someone that just won't take no for an answer when you're given that person the brush off signal and they still keep calling you. So anybody that calls you, several times in an hour, let alone like 15 or 20 or 30, yeah, you're getting into that category of person that I don't even want to risk being in that situation. And you could tell that John didn't want to either. And he was too nice a guy to get out of it. He didn't know what to do. But I wish he had. And I guess none of us would be here doing this now if he had, but it would be a worthy price. It'd be worth that price. So it would be worth that trade-off if we could only have the guy back. Not that I didn't know him, but you can tell he's a great guy. So, all right, guys. So let's call it a night, and I will see everybody tomorrow. Thank you very much for being here.